Good morning, everybody. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And I'd like to warmly welcome you to these first information days on Horizon Europe Cluster 6, the work programme for 2021. Food, bioeconomy, natural resources, agriculture and environment. It's not a random collection of words, it's a whole programme that we put together. My name is Paul Webb. I'm heading the Department on Green Europe at the European Research Executive Agency, and I'm going to moderate this plenary session this morning. A few words on the technical aspects to start with. So the event is web streamed, it is recorded, it'll be available later for viewing. And I've already had a certain interest from people in New Zealand to watch the recording. If you have a connection issue, then the best thing you can do is to just simply close the browser and reopen it. And I'm informed that it works better with the Chrome browser rather than anything else. During this online event, you'll be able to raise questions to the speakers via Slido, www.slido.com, here it is. You can either use the hashtag or the QR code to connect to Slido. Later on, when we have a number of rooms, you'll be able to select the room where you want to post questions, and you can connect to that via your mobile phone or the browser and send your questions at any time. So you don't have to wait until the end of a presentation, you can do it any time, and you can submit questions at different times. In this plenary session this morning, we're going to concentrate on questions of general interest, but there is a possibility that we will take the questions up and later on under the relevant destination. If you can just indicate a topic reference, if that's what you're interested in, that would be really helpful. And please vote for the questions if you look at them and you think that's interesting to you. That will help us to know what is more interesting to the people listening. We'll answer as many questions as we can live in the session. Others we may reply in writing in Slido. If it can't be answered, then you can check on things like the frequently asked questions, but also you can continue to ask on Slido, or you can ask questions on Twitter, and we'll follow that for a little while and make sure that we answer as many people as possible. So different ways that you can communicate with us. And if you are communicating about it, we'd love you to make some reference to use the hashtag CL6InfoDay or any of the other hashtags that are on this particular slide. That will help us to monitor a little bit what's going on and perhaps attract some more people. So a word on Horizon and its budget and the overall aims. It is a new framework programme. It's bigger than ever before. It's got more ambition than ever before, and we're really very excited. Certainly many of the speakers you'll hear this morning have worked very hard on this for the last 2-3 years. Personally, I was working on trying to increase the budget, thinking about how we distribute the budget. But many people have been working on this, and it's really exciting now to have actually been able to publish the calls and now to have this info days and really get some research done, because that's what we want to do. Across these 2 days, different colleagues from the Commission, European Commission, and the Research Executive Agency in particular will be presenting and exchanging with you about this work programme. This cluster has around 9 billion euros allocated to it over the course of Horizon Europe, and 1 billion euros in the 2021 calls to find solutions to halt and reverse the decline of biodiversity, ensure food and nutrition security, and accelerate the ecological transition. These are all important things. And we want Cluster 6 to be a tremendous success, all of us. But quite humbly, we can only do it through you and with you as researchers. So that's why we want to share information so that you're better prepared to apply for EU funding from the 2021 calls. And we hope that, first of all, the programme delivers what you would expect, and these 2 days will deliver on your expectations. We don't do the research just for the research itself. We do it to influence policies. We do it to influence our environment. And that's why we have to bring it together with the policy context of the programme. And that's why this morning you're going to hear from 3 directors within the European Commission who are going to give you their perspective on what this policy framework is, what they want to achieve over the course of this programme. John Bell from DG Research and Innovation, Nathalie Sauze from DG Agriculture, and Gilles Gantelet from DG Environment, who will be, he's recorded a video actually. Different points of view, but all within this one big policy framework around this cluster. You're also going to hear about the key novelties that come with Horizon Europe and important aspects and guidance for proposal preparation, submission, and the evaluation process. In the afternoon and until the end of the event tomorrow, we're going to split up into 3 virtual breakout rooms where the colleagues from the different services are going to present all the topics of the 2020-21 work programme in different sessions, which you can see on the slide at the moment. And I think this is a really good opportunity, it's a unique opportunity, in fact, for you to raise questions you have on the content of the work programme, to try and think what is behind the choice that we've made of particular actions, why are we doing it? And I hope that if you think about why we're doing it, that will enable you to modify, perfect your applications. The work programme was published on the 16th of June, of course, and please have a look at it and use it to prepare your questions. So we're going to focus on the Cluster 6 work programme, but there's also one session on missions, in particular to look at 2 that are closely connected to Cluster 6, healthy oceans and perhaps even more healthy soils. Missions are a new part of Horizon Europe where we want to even more closely link the research and the deployment of solutions. And I hope that will be interesting and inspiring to you. So you can have a look at the detailed agenda. You can see when specific, or help you to find out when specific topics will be presented and discussed. And they're going to be, in fact, it's a very short video presentation, a pitch, if you like, for each one of the project officers, policy officers, to show what they are trying to achieve with their call. And hopefully that will maximize the time for question and answer session. If you're keen to apply, you probably want to build a balanced consortium. And to help you with this, there is a brokerage event organized on Friday by the national contact points. And national contact points are important in providing guidance in the preparation of proposals. And afterwards, when they're being implemented, they are in your member state, they are there to help you. I'd like to thank them for their support and the brokerage event that they will run on Friday. As I say, a good opportunity to find people with the same interests as you, perhaps to build your consortium or to network, to make some connections. And I especially like to thank all the colleagues who prepared this event. I hope it's going to be very impressive. Everything I've seen is certainly very impressive. And thank you very much to all the people who are doing that. So we would like to start with 3 quick Slido questions. And you should see in the Slido coming up in a few seconds, the first Slido poll. And the question is, in which country is your organization based? And there's a few choices that you have. And this will just, if you could just answer this question, it would really help us just to get an idea, think about where you're coming from, and that will perhaps help us in thinking about our presentations later on. So I hope in just a minute there's going to be a poll coming up. Can anyone tell me, is the poll on the Slido now? There we are. In which country is your organization based? If you could answer that, that would be great. I think you get 30 seconds to answer, so give you 30 seconds or a minute to answer. That's really good. Thank you very much. Trying to get it on my phone. Okay, give you, still numbers are going up quite sharply, so we'll give you another 15 seconds or so. That's great. I'm seeing Turkey, that's good. Norway, Ukraine, that's nice. Malaysia, lovely. Okay, 10 seconds now. 10 seconds and we'll close it. Five, 2, 1. Okay, can we close that poll, please, and have a look at the results? Coming on the screen? I'm not seeing it, are you? There we are. Can we have the results, please? That's the results. Okay, sorry about that. All right. South Africa is good, Malaysia. So mostly EU and associated countries and a few others. That's good. Thank you very much. The second question is to ask you what type of entity you work in, whether you're a national body, secondary higher education, research organization. Could you possibly put down what you consider yourself to be? I think you can, I don't think you can only probably answer once, but it'd be interesting just to see who we've got. I hope that we have a lot outside the normal people, if you like. SME is fantastic to see some small businesses involved, but mostly research organizations, okay. Okay, we'll leave it another 10 seconds, but I think the message is clear there. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, that's good. Could we close that poll, please? And we have a third one, just to ask you about how much experience you've had in EU research innovation funding. 4 possible answers here. Perhaps you could answer the best one. We're hoping we have some complete newcomers, but I'm not sure that we have so many. But could you just answer that one quickly, please? Oh, that's great. I'm really delighted. 15% of people who no, 11% of people who, 19% of people now, complete newcomer. That's absolutely fantastic. I'm really pleased that you're here. It really is our intention to have a wide range of people, and that's fantastic that you're joining us. Thank you very much. Okay, we can close that poll. Thank you very much. And I'd like to introduce the first speaker. John Bell is a director in DG Research and Innovation, and he is been a big player in setting up this cluster and advocating for it within the Commission. John, you have 20 minutes maximum, please, to give us your perspective on what are we aiming for.
Good morning, Paul, and good morning, Planet, and welcome to probably in Horizon Europe, the world's most ambitious public research and innovation program. It's the most ambitious research innovation program on the planet, working with the planet and for the planet. And this cluster that we'll be discussing this morning is central to the great transition that is at the heart of what the European Union is for, working through research and innovation with our partners across Europe and across the world to achieve what we call in the Green Deal a climate neutral continent working within its environmental and natural resource boundaries. So I have the pleasure as the director for what's called the Healthy Planet part of the research department of the Commission to introduce the first work programme of Horizon Europe Cluster 6 called Food, Bioeconomy, Natural Resources, Agriculture and Environment. And you're all expected to have that off by heart by the end of the day. I'm sure there's an acronym in there somewhere. And to show how it'll be a key enabler of the ecological transition. And what you'll see in the presentation this morning is this is a co-created venture across Commission departments, and my colleagues Natalie and Gilles, who are co-creators with me, will come in as we discuss this. So we move on to the next slide. So Cluster 6, food, bioeconomy, natural resources, agriculture and environment is a component of the second pillar of Horizon Europe. So if you think about Horizon Europe, this huge public framework program, it has one pillar which is about the next Einsteins, the principal investigators in the European Research Council. But the middle pillar that we're in here is how we're going to make these big changes using research innovation for the public policy goals. And the third pillar is more about the innovation and the investment in bringing things to market. So Cluster 6 sits in this second pillar, right at the heart of the policy objectives of European research innovation. It's a component of what's called the global challenges and European industrial competitiveness of Horizon Europe. Our activities in Cluster 6 are expected to play a key role in the transformation of the European Union's economy, ecology and society, which is at the heart of what we talk about. When you hear about the Green Deal today, it's not simply a policy that's specific to Europe. It's this great transition that we need to make between now and 2050 across all the major systems that support our lives, our ecology and our society, not just in Europe, but around the world, to get the planet and the climate and the natural resources and the environment and the economy aligned. It'll be instrumental to reduce things like environmental degradation, to halt and reverse the decline of biodiversity, to better manage our natural resources while meeting our climate objectives and ensuring, critically, food and water security. It'll ensure that we develop a sustainable bioeconomy as part of a sustainable future. So the cluster that we're going to be hearing about this morning is really central to achieving many of the goals that are at the heart of the UN Sustainable Development Goals approach. Next slide. We have a strategic plan, which is the way of framing from 2021 to 2024 the direction of travel of Horizon Europe. So if you want to see what it is, the thinking that's behind the work program we're talking about today, it's in the strategic plan 2021 to 2024. And the work program and the strategic plan have been co-created, as I said at the outset, by our colleagues working across the Commission services, working with our member states and with our stakeholders. For this, our Cluster 6, which is really central to so many of these great transitions, more than 12 of the Directors General, that's the departments of the European Commission, have worked together tirelessly over the last couple of years to co-create this first work programme. This has led, I think, to, as Paul said at the outset, a work programme that's much more focused on delivering on the policy-driven nature of the European Union's mandate, to try and maximise the impacts on the economy and society of the research and innovation that's needed to prepare this long-term change of direction. In particular, three departments of the Commission, 3 DGs, have a code-sharing role in Cluster 6. Myself working in DG Research and Innovation, my colleague Natalie Sauls, who will be speaking next in DG Agriculture and Rural Development, and my colleague Gilles Gontelet in DG Environment. And together we have steered the process from initial ideas, looking at the evidence, to the drafting and publication of this work programme. A part of this process, of course, at the very centre is our executive agency for Cluster 6, which is the European Research Executive Agency, REA, which is known to many of you, and which has a really distinguished track record and great experience in the implementation of Societal Challenge 2's Horizon 2020 programme that we're building on. The European executive agencies have been organised and restructured in order to correspond more directly to Horizon Europe activities. In particular, several of our colleagues with expertise in what was called Societal Challenge 5 have now joined REA. And so REA is fully equipped for the evaluation of the proposals and for the grant management of Cluster 6. And I think this will mean you can build even more on the great trust that we have in the fantastic professionalism and expertise of the evaluation and grant process that REA has been delivering. Now it's more aligned with the kind of cluster that we have, and this should help everybody as we move forward. Next slide. According to the policy cycle fully reflected in new organisations, different policy DGs of the Commission working in the areas where these targets that have been set by the Green Deal need to be supported by research and innovation for the programme will use the results of past and ongoing research projects in the implementation of these policies. They also express the policy research and innovation needs, which are translated into co-created work programs. So there's a policy cycle from research and innovation into policy, back into evaluation, and through again. The competence of REA, the European Research Executive Agency, includes the evaluation of proposals, the management of projects, and the dissemination of results. So REA is a key partner for you and for us in this whole journey ahead. Coordination is ensured between policy officers in the policy DGs and the project officers in REA. We're just one big happy family working together. Next slide. Now let me give you some more broad indications on the budget allocated to Cluster 6 for the 7 years of this framework programme up to 2027. The budget amounts to almost 9 billion euros, and the operational budget of 8.4 billion euros is at the centre of our discussions over the 7 years, out of which we will be putting aside around about 10% to support the European Green Deal missions, which you'll hear about in the course of these presentations today. And they're also at the heart, they're driven by research innovation, so there's a strengthening of the work we do. Cluster 6 will support also the Circular Biobased European Partnership, which is a major driver of investment in the sustainable bioeconomy on the ground, and is an institutionalized partnership, what's called a joint undertaking in Eurospeak. An amount of €1 billion is reserved for that partnership, which again is also about driving research innovation closer to market. As a result, the budget available for the work programs of Cluster 6 will be around €6.5 billion. This is a significant increase if you can compare it with the Horizon 2020 budget available for the same areas. And it's a very strong signal from the European Union's institutions, the member states, the Parliament and the Commission about how central the work that you are involved in is to the next direction that we need to take. Let me move on in the next slide. Let me move on back to what I mentioned a moment ago, the Circular Biobased Partnership. The Circular Biobased Partnership, which is about to be launched probably at the end of this year, the beginning of next year. And it sits in the context of the European Green Deal, where we're asked to implement, both for the economy and society, and as part of the European Union's Bioeconomy Strategy action point, which is to mobilize public and private stakeholders in research, demonstration and deployment of sustainable, inclusive and circular bio-based solutions. A very, very long way of describing a massive shift in investment in getting the innovation on the bioeconomy on the ground and into new ideas and new places close to market. So this Circular Bio-Based Partnership will produce major contributions to the climate targets in 2030 to pave the way for climate neutrality by 2050 and to increase the sustainability and the circularity of production and consumption systems in the bioeconomy. It will focus on multi-scale biorefinery processing to source and convert biomass into bio-based products in a sustainable way. And it will develop circular economy approaches such as the use of biological waste from agriculture, industry, municipal, and blue sectors. And last but certainly not least, it will deploy bio-based innovation at regional level and particularly in rural areas with rural actors to support the development of the new economy, the new value chains for rural and economically depressed regions. Next slide. Sticking with partnerships, the other partnerships supported by Cluster 6 are or will be embedded in the work programme. Now, the rules of Horizon Europe have moved on from Horizon 2020, and there's a lot more streamlining and clarification as to how partnerships work. So now with Horizon Europe, an effort has been made to streamline the partnerships, notably by limiting their number and increasing their size to make them more efficient tools for you and for those who need these partnerships to drive change. For Cluster 6, there will be 7 co-funded partnerships identified. They're displayed on the slide with their budget over the 7 years. 3 of them are included in our work programme today for 2021 to 2022. Rescuing biodiversity to safeguard life on Earth, water security for the planet, and a climate neutral, sustainable and productive blue economy. The 4 others will be included in work programme, the next work programme 2021-2022, accelerating farming systems transition, animal health, the agriculture of data, and safe and sustainable food systems. So you can see how clearly defined these partnerships are and how central they are to these great transitions. Overall, the EU budget for the Cluster 6 co-funded partnerships is expected to slightly exceed €1 billion over the 7 years of the programme. Next slide. The structure of the work programme is defined in a new way. It's driven by the intervention logic of the cluster, which is the result of this intense co-creation process. We had a very long and detailed discussion, as Paul said at the outset, across the system, across the services, across policies, to work out how this framework programme should be organised to have the maximum effect on the policy changes that need to be undertaken. And more details of this will be given in the session Cluster 6 Explained. So the work programme is therefore structured along 7 destinations, which are displayed on the screen, with the corresponding calls in 2021. For the first destination, biodiversity and ecosystem services, 2 calls will be launched in 2021, since a dedicated call was needed to launch the European partnership that we just mentioned, called Rescuing Biodiversity to Safeguard Life on Earth, to get that moving. All calls opened on the 22nd of June 2021, and their deadline is the 6th of October 2021, with one exception. The call corresponding to the Biodiversity Partnership has a deadline of the 22nd of July. Next slide. The first work programme is, of course, very ambitious, not only in terms of objectives, but also in terms of budget. More than €1.9 billion will be spent over 2021 and 2022. This is a very significant increase compared with the budget to comparable areas under Horizon 2020. The budget for 2021 alone is around €1 billion, and for 2022, around €900 million. Now, the 2030 Biodiversity Strategy and the Farmtofolk strategy, central new policies of the European Union, are key Green Deal initiatives for the cluster and will benefit from a substantial support in 2021, with respectively 215 and €186 million allocated to the corresponding calls. The calls corresponding to the circular economy and bioeconomy sectors, to clean environment and zero pollution, to climate action and to communities are allocated respectively, as you can see, 127 million, 65 million, 108 million and 53 million. We know that we need a transformation in how we make decisions and how we work and how we change. So new governance models will be absolutely crucial to achieve the Green Deal objectives. Alongside environmental observation, digitalization, and the harnessing of knowledge systems that are essential, such as the Agricultural Knowledge Information System, ACIS, 223 million euros will be spent on this corresponding call in 2021. And that is really to accelerate the process of transition and change. Next slide. So let's turn to policy for a moment. I'm going to start with the ocean, the food systems, and Nathalie Saws van de Wever and Gilles Gontelet will continue with the policies linked to their respective domains of competence. On the ocean, I think the ocean has been and remains the blind spot in terms of people's understanding of what is driving and what needs to be solved in terms of these great planetary systems. There has been a general lack of awareness on issues at their stake and their scale and their directness. And I think research and innovation, particularly under Horizon, has made huge steps forward in connecting the oceans and the systems that are there with the problems and the solutions that lie ahead. So our Green Deal objectives can only be fulfilled by restoring the health of the ocean and unlocking its potential for sustainable development. And Europe has defined key deliverables and targets for this aim, for example, in the areas of biodiversity and marine protected areas, where there has to be a massive scaling up in restoration and building of marine protected areas and preventing the collapse of biodiversity. The reduction of pollution by plastic litter, microplastics, nutrients and chemical pesticides, and a return to sustainable fish stock levels. The recently adopted new approach for a sustainable blue economy in the European Union sets out an ambitious but realistic agenda for the blue economy to achieve the European Green Deal's objectives of decarbonisation, zero pollution, circularity, and biodiversity. And research and innovation has to be an active driver in that. The European Union has set itself an ambitious agenda to protect and to restore the ocean and the sea basins. To reach ambitious targets set in the European Green Deal, a transformational effort is required. Incrementalism will not be enough in this decade of decision. We have to avoid the tipping points by 2030. So research and innovation is being called on to step up and help us to provide these transformations. Our Cluster 6 offers broad opportunities in this area with many topics dedicated to the ocean. Next slide. Missions, I've mentioned before, European Green Deal missions are one of the important novelties of Horizon Europe. And the missions, the idea of the missions, which have been set out initially in the European Green Deal communication, are to have major, like the moonshot in the 1960s, is to have a public goal which is understandable to the public, which can transform things in an inspiring way, and which can be delivered and motored through research and innovation, providing the solutions. In the way that we brought people to the moon and back in the 60s, we now have to do the same on our own planet here in some of the big areas. So we'll hear more about that today. There are 4 European Green Deal missions, which we'll hear about, which are at the center of Horizon Europe. For the mission, one of the missions for the mission Ocean, Seas and Waters, the strategic objective is to put the EU on a path to restore the ocean and waters by 2050, enabling key European Green Deal transitions. And this means that substantial work has to be done in this decade to prevent the deterioration and to restore the oceans and waters by the end of the decade in the sea basins around Europe and in the rivers around Europe and in the water system of Europe, from the seas to the lakes, to the rivers, to the sea basins. To restore the oceans and seas, this mission will aim to generate solutions for the 3 interlinked principal drivers of degradation. So addressing the pollution that is affecting the system, addressing climate mitigation, and then addressing, restoring and protecting the ecosystems which are collapsing in our water system. The mission will support the implementation effort of the Green Deal and provide a toolkit for change. So you will see these rolling out in the course of the next few months, and they're right within the research and innovation domain, but with a much more directed sense of what has to be delivered. Next slide. Moving to another of our life support systems, food systems, the work program has been developed taking into account the orientations defined for Food 2030, the food systems approach that was championed in research and innovation, which is now mainstream, as we see with the UN Summit on Food Systems later this year. So the need for a systemic approach to improve insights, solutions and governance is at the heart of this approach. looking beyond sectors and disciplines and embracing the full complexity of the challenges and solutions. So if you're looking at, there are many different aspects of the food system, but for the whole food system to shift forward on climate, on circularity, on sustainability of waste systems, and of course on the economic benefits to community, you need to look at a lot of the things in an interconnected way. It looks beyond sectors and disciplines, embraces the full complexity. We're acting on leverage points where research and innovation can provide impactful solutions for the economy, for society, and for the ecology. And here again, we need to co-create, collaborate, align, and leverage right across public sector and education, research and private sector, and of course to work from the outset with citizens and consumers, which is something you're going to see a lot more of right across Horizon Europe. The 2021 calls address the Food 2030 key priorities on nutrition for sustainable and healthy diets, on food systems supporting a healthy planet, circularity and resource efficiency as we move to this post-waste world, and innovation and empowering communities. I mean, this is at the heart of the added value in most of our economies and societies across Europe, which has a global tradition in food innovation and excellence. The development of the work programme in this area was supported by the Food 2030 Pathways for Action, which is worth a read, to transform food systems at local, regional, national and international level. And our keynote speakers from DG Agriculture and Rural Development and DG Environment are now going to present other important policies linked to Cluster 6. So thank you, Bill Bridges. It's time for research and innovation to step up, and Cluster 6 is the place where it will happen. Over to you, Paul and Natalie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. No, that's great. Thank you. Thank you so much. It really, it was almost precisely 20 minutes. It didn't feel like it. Just before we move on, can I just remind you to ask any questions that you have, please, on the Slido. I'm aware that I have certain linguistic advantages compared to some of the others. If you're not comfortable writing in English, I haven't asked my colleagues, but you may write in French or Spanish, Italian, or Polish. I'll take, if you're really not comfortable in writing in English, I don't want that to be a reason why you don't want to ask questions. So please take that opportunity. And just to remind you that it is being recorded, so you can listen again. That's no problem. So next we have Natalie Soos van der Wever from DG Agriculture, who's going to talk to us about how they see it from the perspective of agriculture, which is, of course, a major part of what we're doing, and it is a major policy in its own right. So Natalie, please.
Yes, thank you, John, and thank you, Paul, for this. It's really a great pleasure for me to be with you today. It's virtually, but it's a good to speak on the Horizon Europe Cluster 6 program. That it's really important. So. Next slide. So in my presentation, I will guide you through the importance of the long-term strategic approach to EU agricultural research innovation in the Cluster 6. And I will also mention some of the most relevant policies and objectives for which research innovation is really key. Next slide, please. So, as you know, the European Commission has put forward a very ambitious agenda regarding sustainability with the European Green Deal, where several objectives and targets need to be reached in the next decade. So, needless to say that this calls for an ambitious research innovation program to support the multitude of strategies, policies, and important targets we have for the future. So next slide, please. To begin with, I would like to mention the Farmtofolk strategy that is at the heart of the Green Deal. It addresses comprehensively the challenges of sustainable food system, already mentioned by John, and recognize the inextricable links between healthy people, healthy societies, and healthy planet. More concretely, with the Farmtofolk strategy, we want to establish sustainable food system that has neutral or positive environmental impact on food production, ensures food security and public health, preserves the affordability of food, and are robust and resilient. All citizens and operators across value chain should benefit from a just transition, and especially in the aftermath in the COVID crisis, pandemic, and the economic downturn. Only by changing the food system, we can make progress in promoting healthy diets, overcoming climate change, and protecting the environment. And our research program will contribute to all of that. Next slide. So, secondly, I would like to mention the EU forest strategy and the importance of it as for our cluster. As announced in the Green Deal communication, the Commission will soon publish a new EU forest strategy which covers the whole forest cycle and promotes the many services that forests provide. Given that many EU policies are relevant to forests, there is a need for a comprehensive strategy to ensure that forests are addressed in a consistent manner across the different policies. The multifunctional management of forests and the use of timber as a sustainable raw material have a crucial role to play in the achievement of the EU climate objectives. The transition to a circular, sustainable bioeconomy, as well as the preservation of biodiversity and the provision of ecosystem services. So you will see that already in 2021, we have several topics contributing to those goals. Next slide. So on Horizon Europe program will also contribute to the long-term vision for rural areas, which was prepared under the priorities of the European Commission on democracy and demography. The European Commission has just adopted on the 30th of June new communications which envisions the future of rural areas as being stronger, connected, resilient, and prosperous by 2040. This is important for the Green Deal and Cluster 6 because rural areas and communities have a key role to play in the sustainability transition. Rural areas cover around 80% of the EU territory and are home to 30% of its people. They are central to the management of natural resources on which the future of every European citizen depends. But to contribute to this transition, they must also be able to benefit from them. So research innovation are key enablers for this vision, and we have a number of research innovation actions that will contribute to a new rural action plan. Next slide. And last but not least, we cannot forget the Common Agriculture Policy with its 9 objectives and cross-cutting objectives. And in particular, the Future CAP post-2020, for which we have just a political agreement, explicitly introduced a cross-cutting objective of fostering knowledge exchange, innovation, and digitalization in agriculture and rural areas. This highlights their pertinent role in delivering on the economic, social, and environmental dimension of sustainable farming. To this end, in the 21-27 period, the Commission will also work with Member States to strengthen the European Innovation Partnership, Agriculture Productivity and Sustainability, very well known by the name EIP Agri, and to promote effective agricultural knowledge and innovation system, AKIS, key for involving all food chain actors and to ensure an effective and speedy uptake of innovation solutions for sustainable farming. So in their CAP strategic plan, Member States will need to scale up support for EIP Agri and AKIS and strengthen resources to develop and maintain appropriate advisory services needed to achieve the Green Deal objectives and targets. Next slide. So now, farmers, foresters, rural communities who are immediate manager of natural resources and the backbone of food system, the European Green Deal sets very ambitious targets. Among others, they need to, I would like to mention, contribute to achieving climate neutrality by 2050, achieve at least 25% of the EU agricultural land under organic farming and a significant increase of organic aquaculture by 2030. And the Commission has adopted in March an organic action plan to achieve this target. and achieve 100% access to fast broadband internet in rural areas by 2025. So it should be stressed that besides all the quantified targets of the Green Deal, there are many other objectives for which no quantitative targets have been yet, but these remain important objectives as well. Research innovation are key enablers, accelerating the progress required to achieve these challenging targets. In fact, as we speak, innovation is transforming the way farmers manage land and produce food for us. But these targets need to be achieved in the next decade. Some of them by 2030, which means that we have only 9 years and 9 growing seasons to achieve these targets. Next slide. So there is no time for complacency. So we have to go fast, and it is time to step up our effort on research innovation. That is why Horizon Europe's strategic plan defines 6 expected impacts that we want to achieve in the long term with research innovation under Cluster 6 specifically, and that across all intervention areas of Cluster 6, including agriculture, forestry, and rural areas. Next slide. So now it seems that we have a lot to do and to achieve, but the good news is that we are not starting from scratch. Since 2014, DG Agri has developed a long-term strategic approach to EU agriculture and research and innovation that we have successfully been implementing through different types of projects supported by 2 European policies, the research innovation from one side with Horizon 2020 and the Common Agricultural Policy working in close synergy. But besides, what is important to highlight is that we implement these strategies through different types of projects at EU and local level, and that we have successfully implemented the so-called multi-actor approach to promote interactive innovation model. This approach explicitly requires the participation of a variety of actors, from farmers, food business, consumers, advisors, researchers, with complementary knowledge and skills in the development of innovative solutions from project conception to implementation. Next slide. But to reach our ambitious goals, we'll also need to consider that the EU only represents only 10% of public research innovation investment made by member states. So it's a key to foster synergies with them through the large-scale research innovation partnerships. In the coming years, as already mentioned by John in his presentation, several European partnerships relevant to the farming sector will be developed. One on digitalization with agriculture of data, the other one on animal health, and the third one, a network of agroecology living labs. In addition, there will be the CBE partnerships, Circular Biobased Europe, as already explained by John, but we will take action there to reinforce the position of the primary producers. And challenges facing agriculture do not stop at EU borders, and cooperation at global scale is key to tackle global challenges. At bilateral level, we will strengthen our cooperation with Africa in the partnership on food and nutrition security and sustainable agriculture. And we will also continue our cooperation with China in the food, agriculture, and biotechnology initiative. At multilateral level, we will foster cooperation with continued support to the International Research Consortium, the ERC STARIDAS, on animal health, and the establishment of a new ERC on the area of soil and carbon. Next slide, please. So, as already mentioned by John, we will have new instruments to reinforce our RE&I capacity, and as the 5 missions for Horizon Europe address some of the greatest challenges facing our society. But one of these challenges is protecting and restoring the health of soils, because healthy soils provide essential ecosystem services, like the production of food and, for example, the filtering of water. They also host biodiversity, cycle nutrients, and store carbon, which is fundamental to mitigate climate change. Next slide. So the mission board, it was a high level of experts, was tasked by advising the European Commission on possible goals and objectives within the mission area. On the basis of the report, which was presented last September, we developed an implementation plan that has received broad support in the project group, that is the group of commissioners inside the commission responsible for research innovation. We have been instructed to move forward with the concrete preparation for the implementation phase, which remains subject to a final decision and its launch in September. So in parallel, services will put together the work program amendment with the action implementing the mission in the 21-22, and we'll discuss this with member states over the summer. The objective is to adopt the work program amendment by the end of 2021 and to launch the action in 2022 on the ground. Concretely, our goal is to lead the transition towards healthy soils for food, people, nature, and climate. The implementation plan proposed by the Commission will allow for a differentiated approach according to member state situation, and it's include measuring improvement relative to the member state baseline assessment of soil health. So improvement will be measured using a set of soil indicators which are defined by soil type. Next slide. So our mission has 8 objectives, which will make sure that we will reach our goal. This objective will support soil health and reduce degradation in the EU while making sure to reduce the global footprints of EU food and timber imports. Additionally, we aim to improve soil literacy in all member states and for all citizens. We want to achieve this objective via actions across all types of land use, sectors, and value chains as driver of soil health. Next slide, please. And so, how do we want to meet the mission goal and the objectives? We identified 4 operational objectives that will allow us to make the mission a reality. The operational objective number 1, with its research innovation program, will allow us to build capacities and the knowledge base for soil stewardship. With the second operational objective, we will co-create and upscale place-based innovation to improve soil health in all places. With this plan, we established living labs and lighthouses to provide spaces for collaboration between relevant partners at regional and sub-regional level. The third operational objective is based on developing an integrated EU soil monitoring system and track progress towards soil health. And as the success of this mission depends on action taken by citizens, engagement and soil literacy are essential. So with the operational objective number 4, we plan to engage with the soil user community and society at large. So next slide. I would like to thank you and also to wish you really a big success for the future proposal. I'm sure that together we will manage to achieve all these very ambitious objectives, part of the Green Deal by the CAP. So thank you very much. And Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nathalie. Now, you've heard a lot from both speakers about different strategies that the European Commission has, or Farm to Fork, Forest, Rural Action Plan, Bioeconomy, Organic, and so on. Some of you might find reading Commission communications a bit hard work and a bit dull, but if you're going to put together a good proposal, I think you really do need to have a look at these strategies to really see what we're aiming for. Well, thank you very much to Nathalie for that. And the next, we're going to have a video, I think, from Gilles Gantelet, who is a director in DG Environment, so the third leg of the triumvirate that lead this cluster. I hope that somebody can put this video on from Gilles.
Good morning to everybody. It's a real pleasure to make this address. I deeply regret that I cannot be physically present because I'm not available at this day, but I wanted to make some introduction in order to explain a bit more also what is the interest for DG Environment to co-chair this Cluster 6, where with our friends of research and agriculture, but also we are representing all the members of this cluster. In fact, what I would like to say is that there is a triple challenge that we are currently facing, and biodiversity and zero pollution, but also on the economic transition. And this triple challenge are pillars of the European Green Deal and require a further effective action. What I would like maybe to present quickly is the nature of this different challenge. And in particular, on biodiversity, as you know, there is a new strategy which has been adopted last May 2020. And this strategy, in fact, aims to spearhead a process so that by 2050, at the global scale, all of the world's ecosystems are restored, resilient, and adequately protected, so that we live in harmony with nature. I suppose that I don't need to tell you that it is needed, but I would like just to remind that biodiversity is facing a crisis which threatens not only the natural world, but also the foundations of our society and economy. And it's not only a question of biodiversity, it's also a question of climate change, it's a question of radical change. The biodiversity strategy that we have defined aims to reverse the present trend, which is not good, to set Europe a new trajectory to restore and protect nature. And for this, the biodiversity strategy establishes some targets and goals for 2030, which are in fact related to the reinforcement of the protected area system, including strictly protecting the EU's remaining primary and old growth forest, but also to restore degraded ecosystem and species, including reversing the decline in pollinators, which is very important, halving also the number of red list species threatened by invasive alien species. And this means working with the people who use those landscapes to help them to introduce practices and solutions which respect nature while ensuring social stability through jobs and income to prevent resistance from their side against those practices. We are in a common trip. This fight against biodiversity loss must be underpinned by sound science. And I think we are all aware of this need here. And this is where Cluster 6 comes in. We already know a lot about how to protect and restore nature, but to ensure the effective transition, we need research, innovation, and knowledge. In order that we be able to test and develop nature-based solutions that can be deployed across a range of sectors. Given the significant impact of food systems, and particularly food production activities and biodiversity, this is a particularly important sector. Research is key to finding pathways for farmers and fishers to transition to sustainable production, including meeting the shared goals of the biodiversity strategy and the Farm-to-Fork strategy. Cluster 6 activities will significantly contribute to filling the knowledge gaps and finding solutions to improve the health of ecosystem and their contribution to human health. They will also promote and facilitate partnerships, including a dedicated biodiversity partnership to make the bridge between science, policy, and practice, and make nature-based solutions a reality on the ground. Horizon Europe regulation establishes the basis for research to contribute to the goals of the biodiversity strategy. Now, it is our job to make sure that this potential is realized through targeted, effective work programs that focus on key challenges. I would like also to insist on the fact that in parallel to this challenge on biodiversity, we need to act on pollution. And it's not surprising that the European Green Deal includes a zero pollution ambition, which has just been adopted in May this year, because we need to act urgently. 1 out of 8 deaths in the EU is linked to environmental pollution. 90% of these deaths are due to non-communicable diseases, out of which cancer score, unfortunately, are the most frequent ones. And let's not forget, in addition to our health, a toxic-free environment is crucial to protect our biodiversity and ecosystem. pollution is one of the 5 main drivers of biodiversity loss. So the good news is that we have a huge opportunity to act now. The recovery plan for Europe provides us a total of 1.8 trillion that we can use inter alia to build back better, more fairly, sustainably, and cleaner towards the zero pollution ambition. Our zero pollution ambition is not an absolute utopian zero. This is clearly something which would be irreconcilable even with life on Earth. But it is the fact that zero means to secure that by 2050, pollution is reduced to levels which are no longer expected to be harmful for health and natural ecosystems. That we will respect the boundaries of our planet, that we can create a toxic-free environment. We have set 2030 targets to complement the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So let's use this opportunity of recovery to fight pollution. Zero pollution thinking should be part of national, regional, and local recovery action, including through innovation across the board. Green technologies, which can help us to reduce pollution, and also including business opportunities. Improving governance on pollution can make our action more effective. Think, for instance, on monitoring pollution for more targeted action. And innovation is a core part of our policy work on zero pollution. Research and innovation will play a central role in accelerating the necessary transitions, deploying and demonstrating solutions, and engaging citizens. The recently adopted Zero Pollution Action Plan foresees that instruments are here or are developed to foster innovation and breakthrough technologies. And we have to explore in order to showcase that zero pollution production can become a reality. Public-private partnerships, such as Water for All, will have a strong zero pollution angle. And Cluster 6, again, has an important role to play in enhancing knowledge and developing technology to act on soil and water pollution. Last but not least, the circular economy. This is really a challenge in the transition in our economy and the way they were fought since the Industrial Revolution. As you know, the European Commission has adopted a new Circular Economy Action Plan in 2020, and it targets how products are designed, how we can develop circular economic processes, how we can encourage sustainable consumption, and how we can ensure that waste is prevented and that the resources used are kept in the EU economy for as long as possible. Deploying circular economy in Cluster 6 means working on urban policies, cities, regions, packaging, single-use plastic, microplastics, textiles, plastics and electronics, value chains, as well as buildings, which is one of the priorities of this Commission. It is also important to work on indicators for monitoring the transition to circular economy and assess environmental footprint and mapping the material flows. All these things are part of the activities of the Cluster 6 and are part of all the things we are aiming to from all DGs in the Commission, but also from all sectors and all actors of research. We need research to succeed, and Cluster 6, in my mind, is one of the most important in order to answer to the triple challenge: biodiversity protection and restoration, zero pollution ambition, circular economy transition. And it explains why DG Environment is very convinced that we can be proactive, and we are very committed to be involved in this cluster to work all together. Thanks a lot, and I wish to see you physically in the coming year.
That's very good. Thank you very much, Gilles. Thank you very much to Nathalie and John as well. So that has given you, I think, a bit of the policy perspective around what we're aiming for in this Cluster 6. I hope that will help you in pitching your applications. We now like to move on to answering a few of the general questions that have come on. I've just been looking at the questions. Some of them are very specific and will be dealt with a little bit later, but there's a few quite popular questions. And the first one very top one. Will there be a second information session organised for the 2022 calls? And I guess the answer is yes, but perhaps someone can tell me and confirm that for me.
Paul, if you want me, Bernd,
yes, please.
I can. Good morning, Paul. Good morning, colleagues. Yeah, just to confirm that we are planning to organize such a session for the next year. So not this year, but next year.
Okay. That was one of the main questions. Will it be recorded? Yes, absolutely. It's being recorded, so you can listen back, and people in other time zones can listen as well. There was another question about the missions. Will there be a separate missions work program? There will be a work program for the research part of missions. Certainly, there will have to be. We hope the first one will be at the end of this year, and that will obviously have a budget attached to it. What other questions do we think we should take now, please, colleagues? For, I think, involvement of non-EU countries. Perhaps somebody could give an answer to that one. There's a few questions around those sort of questions. Can anyone answer that right now?
Paul, if you wish, I can say a few words. If I saw the questions on Slido, there was one particular question from our colleagues and friends from Egypt. Yes. To confirm they have been listed in the relevant annex to be eligible for funding. So the answer is yes. There was another question related to participation of non-EU, non-associated countries in CSAs, and the general answer is this is not possible unless in the specific calls this has been stipulated as an exception, so that non-associated could participate. But the general answer is no. So that's not possible.
Yeah. Now, this program is, especially this part of the program, is open to the world as far as possible. You know, there were a lot of discussions and quite a lot of controversy about whether certain parts of the program will be open to non-EU, non-associated countries and so on. That's really not a problem for this cluster. I think we know that in this cluster, we have to involve the whole world. Is the Ocean and Water Mission going to be launched soon? Yes, we really hope so. September, I think, Natalie, is the aim, is it not?
We hope to have the final approval for September.
Okay. Is it still possible to register for the brokerage event? I suppose that the answer is yes. Can someone confirm that?
If I may, Paul, it seems that the registration was open until yesterday only.
Okay.
But we are checking.
That's a shame. Yes, let's try and get it open as much as we can. Okay. Any other of the general questions that we need to answer? Anyone wants to come in?
Paul, there was, but I don't know if John still wants to come in, but there was a general question about how do we ensure coherence between the different clusters.
Yeah.
So I mean, from our side, what we'd like to say here, and John, Natalie explained it already very well. Of course, that we have the we have the policy context, we have the strategic plan, and we have the co-creation principles to work across the clusters to ensure a synergy. So just to ensure that there's a very close cooperation between the different clusters to make sure that there's coherence and no duplication.
Yeah. No, and Bernd is right in the middle of that because he has a certain responsibility for two clusters. I don't say it's perfect, but we've done more than ever before. That's for sure. That's for sure in this. I don't know, John, do you want to, or Natalie, do you want to say, John, maybe you say a couple of words about how we are trying to ensure synergies across clusters?
Yes, Paul and Bernd, I think number one, in the governance of Horizon Europe, we have a strategic programming committee whose task is to make sure that the strategic coherence of the work that we're doing is maintained and monitored. And the structures in preparing the work programs across the DGs through these new co-creation groups means that you have a much better sense of what's going on in the other clusters from the very beginning the whole way through. And then you have the much more systematic checks as we're drafting across there. There are, of course, a number of areas that are linked and decisions have to be taken and where exactly the activity should go. But I think, as you say, Paul, it is the most connected, the most coherent, the most synergistic work program that we have produced. We're also looking in many areas to where down the line other European Union programs will be able to interact with what happens in these work programs. So, and that'll be particularly the case when we look at the work in the missions. But I think people will see this is a very joined up approach.
I think I've certainly read a lot of the work programs, the different work programs, and it's very obvious, not just linking between the different clusters, but linking to different EU programs as well. There's a lot about that you'll see as you go through. 2022 info session. So we have a coordinators day in September. And then what about the 2022 info session? Somebody, Bent or Olivier maybe?
Paul, you mean the question on the info session for the 22 calls?
Yes.
Yeah. So I can confirm again that we are planning this and definitely to prepare for the 22 calls, but we haven't yet scheduled it with a concrete date. So information will be, of course, provided on all our websites and social media.
Thank you. I think we're well aware that if it's too late, it's not very useful. So I think that will be certainly within our mind. Okay, are there any other questions that we think we need to answer at this stage? Because I see some of the others will be perhaps answered later on. It would be nice to open the brokerage. Indeed, I don't know why they've chosen to close it this day. Maybe we can try and see with them whether it's possible to reopen, but it's run by the national contact points themselves, so we're not directly in charge of that. Anything else, or can we consider that we've answered the questions for now and we move on to the next stage? Separate question on the separate work program for the missions. Well, there will be a work program. There has to be a work program if we want to do research actions, and we would expect that to come out. The aim is to have about December. The aim is for December, and we really hope that will provide. I mean, there will be a list of actions, same as any ordinary work program, very much then focused on these missions and how we put that together with different programs. One question I saw just coming through there about Coordinators Day, which is the 7th of September, I think, isn't it? Olivier, are you working on that? Olivier, please, can you just confirm about the Coordinators Day on the 7th of September? Please come in. Olivier, can anyone attend? It doesn't just have to be coordinators, or it's really strictly limited to coordinators? Invitation only coordinators. Okay, no, Coordinators Day, 7th of September, just for coordinators. Although they can be a useful relay to other people, but that will be a chance for coordinators to come and get more information about details of how things are going to work. Lovely, thank you very much. Okay, well, I think that the other questions can perhaps wait till the other sessions. So I think we should move to the next section then, where we're going to have Horizon Europe Cluster 6 explained, if I've got that right. And we're going to have Caroline Poitier and Natalia Brezina from DG Agriculture, who are going to explain Cluster 6 to us, I hope. So please carry on.
Good morning. My name is Caroline Potier, so I'm going to present with Natalia some more specific aspects on Cluster 6. First slide, please. Next slide. So in this presentation, I will start with an introduction on Cluster 6 intervention logic, which is a key element for the new proposals. And Natalia will then give an example of an impact of the cluster. And then she will move to explain the complementarities and synergies of Cluster 6 with other work program parts and other instruments. Finally, I will take the floor again to briefly introduce the opportunities for international cooperation in Cluster 6. Next slide. So let's start with some more explanation on the intervention logic. Next slide. So this work program is the result of an extensive co-creation process which started in summer 2019 with the preparation of the first Horizon Europe strategic plan and ended with the adoption of Cluster 6 work program and the publication of the calls in June 2021. From the beginning, there were intensive exchanges with member states, associated countries, the European Parliament, and the public through public consultations, including direct interactions with stakeholders in the 2020 editions of the Research and Innovation Days. Next slide, please. This graph presents the overall architecture of Horizon Europe for the 7 years. The first strategic plan covers 4 years between 21 and 24. A second strategic plan should be elaborated and cover 25 to 27. And we are now working under the first strategic plan. And the first work program covers 21 and 22. It has just been adopted. A second work program on which we are starting to reflect now will cover 23 and 24. Under these work programs, projects will be instrumental to implement the overall Horizon Europe policy in order to reach its objectives. Next slide, please. So, as I said, it's very important with Horizon Europe to get familiar with the intervention logic. This is why I would like to briefly introduce the definition of the terms used, which will be further explained in the presentation of the key novelties. In this respect, I would like to inform that colleagues have recorded a video to explain in details what are key impact pathways, how they will be evaluated, and how to deal with this in the preparation of applications. Coming back to Cluster 6, the starting point is the strategic plan, which defines broad long-term impacts linked to policy priorities. This is the green part of the table on the screen. Impacts are grouped in impact areas of the strategic plan. In the work program, long-term impacts are translated into destinations. This is the pink part of the table. Destinations are big chapters of the work program. The work program also defines concrete expected impacts, which are long-term effects on society, including the environment. The work program adds the level of outcomes, which are medium-term effects of Horizon Europe projects, such as uptake, diffusion, use, and deployment of the project's results. Finally, we have the level of results of projects. They are short-term, called outputs. Next slide, please. When you open Cluster 6 work program, after the table of content, you first see the introduction, which gives very important information In particular, we have a paragraph on the multi-actor approach, which will be explained in a session later. So if you want to see how it works, you first go to the introduction of the work program. Then the work program is structured along destinations, the big chapters, which include the common following elements: the title, a narrative, expected impacts, the link with impact areas of the strategic plan, and then a table summarizing the goals of the destination. Next slide, please. Topics include the following common elements: the title, expected outcomes with policy context, and the link to one or several impacts of the destination. And this is very important because you will have to use this for the preparation of the applications. And then you have the scope describing the area that needs to be tackled if the expected outcomes are to be successfully addressed. Next slide, please. This slide summarizes Horizon Europe architecture. At the top, you have the legal basis, which defines pillars, clusters, and intervention areas in the clusters. The intervention areas define the thematics to be covered. Then, at the middle of the slide, you have the strategic plan, which defines key strategic orientations for research and innovation, corresponding to the EU policy priorities, and where long-term impacts for research and innovation are defined. The work program is structured along destinations corresponding to the long-term impacts identified in the strategic plan. This is where you have the link. It includes the topics with expected outcomes and scope. Next slide, please. This slide shows the architecture of the Green Deal. And for Cluster 6, we have a very good correspondence with a number of relevant EU policy priorities in the European Green Deal. I would like to quote the following initiatives which are very relevant for Cluster 6. First, the climate law and all related initiatives, because climate is cross-cutting, and given the areas covered in Cluster 6, it is very relevant, even if climate science is embedded in Cluster 5 now. Then you have the Biodiversity Strategy 2030. You have the Farmtofolk strategy, of course, the Circular Economy Action Plan, the Zero Pollution Ambition, among others. And then I would like now to pass the floor to Natalia, who is going to explain a bit more in details with an example of the intervention logic.
Yes, thank you very much, Caroline, and good morning to all participants. Having, let's say, this, starting from the policy priorities that were outlined by Caroline in Cluster 6, which are actually at the heart of the Cluster 6 from the European Green Deal. We, please next slide, we actually set first the 4 key, please next slide. We have set 4 key strategic orientations. And among these 4, so while this, following the priorities, we have set the 4 key strategic orientations in the strategic plan, and all of them kind of apply to all clusters. But for Cluster 6, the key strategic orientation B is actually the most important, and it's reads restoring Europe's ecosystem and biodiversity and managing sustainably natural resources to ensure food security and a clean and healthy environment. Next slide. The next slide. Yes, so the strategic plan, in addition to the key strategic orientations, for each cluster, it outlines the expected impacts. And in Cluster 6, what do we want to achieve? We would like to achieve 6 expected impacts that cut across all the intervention areas. And with RNI under cluster 6, we want to contribute to climate neutrality and adaptation to climate change. We would like also to achieve preservation and restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems, to contribute to sustainable and circular management of natural resources, also to tackle pollution and boost the bioeconomy. Then in Impact 4, we would like to contribute to achieving food and nutrition security for all, from sustainable food systems from farm to fork. And in Impact 5, we want to achieve balanced development of rural, coastal, and urban areas. And the 6th impact relates to innovative governance models that enable sustainability and also boost the potential of environmental observations. Next slide, please. These expected impacts set in the strategic plan were then the basis upon which we have organized the work program around 7 destinations. And basically the impacts correspond almost 1-to-1 to the destinations. And we see that we have a destination on land, oceans, and water for climate action. Then we have a destination biodiversity and ecosystem services. And then 2 destinations that correspond to Impact 3. One is on circular economy and bioeconomy sector. The second on climate environment, a clean environment and zero pollution. The next is fair, healthy, and environmentally friendly food systems from primary production to consumption. Destination on resilient, inclusive, and green rural, coastal, and urban areas, and a destination on innovative governance, environmental observations, and digital solution in support of the Green Deal. Now, in the next slide, in each destination, we have a destination narrative as explained by Caroline. And for example, here in destination 2, that is on in support of the farm to fork strategy, the proposals should set out a credible pathways to fair, healthy, safe, climate and environmentally friendly, resilient food systems from primary production to consumption, ensuring food and nutrition security for all within the planetary boundaries in the EU and globally. And this is basically the expected impact that is included in the strategic plan. And then we unpack this expected impacts into several impacts in the expected impacts in the destination. And the first impact is on sustainable farming systems, the second on sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, and the third impact on sustainable, healthy, inclusive food systems. So following the narrative of the destination, then we have the different topics. And in the next slide, for example, the topic on uncovering the farmers' lock-ins and levers to move to sustainable food production systems, we link this topic to the policy context. So here, for example, the rationale is that although the EU has made strides in improving the sustainability of agriculture, still substantial efforts are needed to actually achieve the targets set in the Farm to Fork strategy, biodiversity and climate action, and so on. And then the topic actually outlines the expected outcomes that we would like the projects to deliver. And here, for example, we would like that the projects will improve the understanding of the challenges and opportunities for the development of sustainable farming systems, but they will also improve the understanding of farmer individual and systemic lock-ins and levers for moving to sustainable production systems, and they will also improve the understanding of the behavior of consumers. And all in all, they will also achieve the impact of better design and implementation of policies, in particular CAP, and improved farm advice, business strategies, and capacities of the researchers. So basically, these outcomes then, please next slide for the animation, are actually then connected to the first impact that was outlined in the expected impact that was outlined in the destination. And in the next slide, so then all the topics that are clustered under calls that slightly has a different meaning than it had in Horizon 2020. So in Horizon Europe, calls are grouping the topics that are within a destination and that have the same deadline for application and the same, let's say, mode of evaluation. So either a single stage or two-stage calls. And in the next slide, I would like to, of course, there are actions in the Cluster 6 work program, but we also have complementarities and synergies with other clusters. And there are also other instruments, in particular the partnerships and missions with which we would like to establish the synergies. So let me start now with Cluster 1 on health. And looking into the work program, so I invite you to have a look because there are actions that might be also of interest to the research community that works within the areas covered by Cluster 6. And here, several examples include the topic on Healthy Citizens 2.0, so supporting digital empowerment and health literacy of citizens. That includes also aspects related to diets. Then another one is on indoor air quality and health, also of the impact of climate change on health. And there is a topic related to the European Partnership for Assessment of Risk from Chemicals that is also important for Cluster 6, and a roadmap towards the creation of the European Partnership on One Health Antimicrobial Resistance that is related in terms of this, that in Cluster 6 we have the scope of animal production and in relation to this actually. Then in Cluster 2 and 3, so 2 on that is dealing with, the next slide please, that is dealing with culture, creativity and inclusive society, and Cluster 3 that is dealing with civil security and society. There are 2 topics that might be of interest for you. The topic in Cluster 2, green technologies and materials for cultural heritage, and in Cluster 3, the fight against organized environmental crime. In the next slide, in the cluster that is dealing with digital industry and space, there are many topics that could be of interest for you. So that's why I did not list all these topics, because I invite you to have a look at the work program. But just to give you maybe a little bit of a review of the scope that is covered there, is that there is a destination on climate neutral, circular and digitalized production. And there is a call on twin, green and digital transition with topics that are covering aspects related to green manufacturing, industrial urban symbiosis, zero waste, circular economy. There is also destination on increased autonomy in key strategic value chains for resilient industry. And here there is a call with topics that is called a digitalized, resource efficient and resilient industry. And here topics relate to raw materials, to chemicals, to plastics, to biomaterials, and green and sustainable materials. Then there is also destination on digital and emerging technologies for competitiveness and fit for the Green Deal. And here the topics cover like ultra low power processors, artificial intelligence, data and robotics, electronics, and so on. Then in destination, open strategic autonomy in developing, deploying and using global space-based infrastructures, services and applications and data. Here the topic cover the issues related to Galileo, Copernicus and Earth observation. So very much complementary to topics under the destination 7 of the cluster 6, which look at environmental observations. And then in destination and human-centered and ethical development of digital and industrial technologies, there is a topic on testing innovative solutions on rural communities demand. And this relates also to the destination 6 under cluster 6 on the rural, urban, and coastal communities. And finally, under cluster 5, that is in the next slide, that is dealing with climate, energy, and mobility. There are also many topics as in classes 4. And here there is a whole destination related to climate science and responses for the transformation towards climate neutrality, with topics around circular economy, climate and environmental policies, restoration of natural wetlands, peatlands, and floodplains, then forest management, and also on rewilding the landscape for climate action. There is a destination on cross-sectoral solutions for climate transition, and also on sustainable, secure, and competitive energy supply. And here the topics cover renewable energy with focus on agriculture and forestry, but also the biofuels, bioenergy, and agrophotovoltaic. And there is also destination on sustainable, efficient, and inclusive energy use, and on clean and competitive solutions for transport modes. So this is important for the, let's say, food value chains and transport there. And then destination on safe, resilient transport and smart mobility services for passengers and goods. So as I said, please have a look at the work programs, because there's abundance of interesting topics. Then we also establish, as I said, the synergies with the partnerships. And in the next slide, you can see please the animation first. Like next slide with the animation, please. Yeah, so here you can see that in cluster 6 we have several partnerships. The first 3 ones on biodiversity, on blue economy, and water for all have been launched already in this work program 21-22, but we are also preparing another partnerships on animal health and welfare, on accelerating farming system transitions for agroecology living labs and research infrastructures, agriculture of data, and safe and sustainable food systems. Please animation. And then across the other clusters, there are also partnerships that might be of interest on chemical risk assessment, on One Health and antimicrobial resistance, and the cluster 1, and the cluster 4 on processes for planet and global competitive space systems. In clusters 5, the partnership on clean energy transition, and under pillar 3, there are also the European Innovation Technology kicks that especially the one on food that is already in place, but also the kicks on energy, on climate and digital might be of interest for you. And please the next slide. Next slide, please. Yes, and then we are also working on the 5 missions in the 5 areas, of which the most relevant for cluster 6 are the one on healthy ocean, seas, coastal and inland waters, on adaptation to climate change, including societal transformation, and of course the mission on soil health and food. And the missions are on a good way to be formally adopted and launched in early autumn. And last but not least, a few words about also synergies with GRC, please in the next slide. So we are also establishing the synergies with GRC in the most, let's say, policy relevant topics that are also listed on this slide, on ecosystems and their services. That is, there is also a topic on related to EU biodiversity strategy, to forestry, to policies that are for rural communities, also the socio-economic empowerment of the users of the sea, on the outbreaks of plant pests, related also to the lock-ins and levers for farmers to move to sustainable farming systems, on internalization of externalities, also in the topic related to alternative proteins. There is also a topic that is focusing on modeling with the agriculture within the safe and just operating space, also modeling the land use aspects, and also about assessing the impacts of the digital technologies in agriculture. And what actually does it mean in practice? Basically, the possible involvement of GRC, I would like to explain in the next slide. So if GRC is mentioned under the eligibility conditions and the scope of the topic, this in practice means that the GRC may participate in this action as a beneficiary requesting zero funding. And then further provisions specifying GRC possible collaboration with the applicants consortia are actually mentioned in the Horizon Europe general annexes on the page number 6. And it outlines as follows that where provided for in the specific call conditions, applicants may include in their proposals the possible contribution of the GRC, but GRC will not participate in the preparation and submission of the proposal. So the applicants will indicate the contribution that the GRC could bring to the project based on the scope of the topic. And after the evaluation process only, the GRC and the consortium selected for finding may come to an agreement on the specific terms of participation for the GRC. And then if the agreement is actually found, then GRC could access to the grant agreement and as a beneficiary that is requesting zero funding and would actually become the member of the consortium. So I will give the floor now to Caroline to explain the international cooperation. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Natalia. I will now briefly introduce the opportunities for international cooperation in Cluster 6. So I will refer to the communication recently published on 18th of May 2021 on the global approach to research and innovation defines Europe's strategy for international cooperation in a changing world. In our cluster, cooperation with other countries is crucial to address sustainability challenges. And I would say that it is in Cluster 6 that international cooperation is the most important because we have strategic policy objectives with EU international partners. In Cluster 6, multilateral as well as bilateral approaches are supported. In 2021, we have in the various calls 32 topics expressly encouraging international cooperation, and they have therefore been flagged for the EC policy priority, a stronger Europe in the world. More will come in 22. And it doesn't mean that other topics are not open because by principle in Horizon Europe we are open in international cooperation. It is just to say that we especially encourage this in Cluster 6. An important feature is the cooperation with Africa. We have 7 topics identified as particularly relevant for the cooperation with Africa. Next slide, please. Let's speak about the oceans first. The All Atlantic Ocean Research Alliance is an example of successful model of multilateral research and innovation partnership. It is based for South Atlantic on the Belém Statement. In Horizon Europe, we have wide opportunities for funding research and innovation projects in this area. I have listed the topics in this slide, but I'm not going to go into the details because we are running out of time. But just to mention that you have the possibility really to strongly contribute in this area with the topics in Cluster 6. Next slide, please. On Earth observation, the Commission is the lead co-chair in 2021 of the group on Earth observations. GEO has the capacity to connect government and academic institutions, data providers, businesses, engineers, and citizens to create Earth observation-based innovative solutions to global environmental, social, and health challenges. In Cluster 6, we are interested in the part of environmental observation, on which we have a number of topics already in 21 and more will follow in 22. Next slide, please. In the area of bioeconomy, Cluster 6 will foster cooperation, notably in the framework of the EU Farm-to-Fork strategy. Cluster 6 will support in particular research and innovation in the area of food systems, including in particular the feasibility of an international platform for food system science. And this is also directly connected to what is proposed in the communication I referred to in the beginning. Next slide, please. Several topics on circular and bioeconomy, pollution are likely to feed into the Global Alliance for Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency, and also into the work of the G7 and the G20. So in this area, again, international cooperation is crucial. Next slide, please. Biodiversity and ecosystem services is an area where the EU is leading global efforts towards a just green transition, and Cluster 6 has strong ambitions in this area. The EU supports both the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, and the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES. Cluster 6 work program will help promoting synergies between the IPCC and IPBES in view of the interdependence between the climate change and biodiversity crisis, taking into account the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030. Next slide, please. While the relevant cluster for climate science is in Horizon Europe Cluster 5, Cluster 6 includes a number of topics in the area of climate change. It is because biodiversity and ecosystems, as well as sectors embedded in Cluster 6, will have a key role to play for the EU to achieve its ambitious objectives in terms of climate. Topics in this area will thus support the EU's role as a key enabler of the transition to climate neutrality and resilience. Next slide, please. The EU has, I'm coming now to more bilateral approaches. And this slide is about the discussions with China. The EU has launched discussions with China on a joint roadmap to establish agreed framework conditions and guiding principles for cooperation to reach a level playing field and reciprocity. Research fields in which cooperation could be of mutual benefits, such as climate science, biodiversity protection, circular economy, food, agriculture, aquaculture, ocean observation, are of course highly relevant for Cluster 6. And this is why we have in this first work program 2 topics targeting cooperation with China in destinations Farm-to-Fork and climate. So this is not that we are naive and we open large calls to China, but we have our bilateral discussions, and we think this is of mutual interest to have this targeted approach. Next slide, please. The EU seeks to enhance its cooperation with Africa in line with the recent communication on a comprehensive strategy with Africa. The role of research and innovation is key to accelerate sustainable and inclusive development. A number of topics in Cluster 6 strongly encourage the cooperation with entities established in African countries. And I would mention, but this is not limitative, the area of biodiversity, where a number of topics really encourage to find partners in Africa. Next slide, please. This slide to focus on a topic in 21, which has been especially designed to target cooperation with Africa. It is about One Health approach for food nutrition security and sustainable agriculture. And in 22, we will have several topics targeting the cooperation with Africa. So I hope this presentation was useful to better understand how Cluster 6 work program was designed, and what are the opportunities in terms of complementarities, synergies, and international cooperation. We hope it will serve as a tool for applicants to prepare high-level proposals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you. We have a number of questions, but just before that, I know you've heard a lot of things: strategic plan, expected impacts, destinations, and outcomes. And it probably seems a lot, and it may be you thinking it's sounding rather bureaucratic, but please don't underestimate these. This has been deliberately planned to try to make sure we're going to get the maximum impact from the research. And if you don't understand them, your application is unlikely to be very successful. On the synergies, yeah, absolutely. There are many synergies already in the work program. Somebody had asked a question about that with Cluster 1. I think that was very clear. Many things within the work program, but many pointers also about how you might go about then moving towards a deployment using other EU funds, including the structural funds, without forcing you, and we can't force the structural funds to do certain things, but to point you in the direction of how you can deploy them. International cooperation is big. I've seen a few questions about China. We're going to perhaps wait a little bit before we go into the full details of who's eligible and not. But some people saying, well, you know, is China in, is China out? You know that there are some issues and discussions around relationships with China in certain areas. We think in terms of Cluster 6, the whole world has to work together. You know, we don't want to be excluding people who can be very important. That might be different in terms of artificial intelligence or quantum funding, but anyway, that's not in this area. But the colleagues will come back later to talk about that. I'm going to have a quick look at the questions in the Slido. Can we put those on the screen perhaps now? Is it possible? Lovely. Yeah, that's China. So how many are there? Several China calls. In this area, it's about cooperation with China. It's not necessarily China being involved in the calls, but cooperation with China is important. There are a few questions about the JRC that I saw. Can we find those? People were asking, do we need to contact the JRC? Can anyone answer that, Caroline or Natalia? Please.
Yes,
Natalia.
I can answer this.
Yeah.
So basically with GRC, as I explained in the slide, the idea is that you should not contact GRC at the moment of preparing the proposal. So basically the participation of GRC is indicated in the table with the conditions. And then also in the scope of the topic, there is a line on what could be the possible contribution of GRC for your consideration to include it or not in the proposal. And then once basically the proposal is selected, then you are allowed to get into contact and into discussions with GRC to agree on the concrete participation of GRC in the project. And then once the agreement is actually found, only then the GRC is joining effectively the project consortium.
That's right.
To clarify.
I mean, these are areas where the GRC is very interested, basically, isn't it? So I mean,
exactly.
They have chosen where they want to be involved, and they can be involved, and I think they can be very useful to help you, as well as providing a bit of a free resource in some ways, which was probably not unexpected. As I say, some of the details about the eligibility of international partners will be dealt with a little bit later, I hope, by the call coordinators. That's what I'm informed. So Alessio and Alessandro, no pressure there, but that's things that we will ask you later. Is there anything else we need to deal with right now? How can you collaborate with the missions yet? Well, you don't need to yet, but I mean, you know where these missions are coming, and certainly many of the actions will link in with those missions. Anything else? I don't see any questions that we have to answer at this stage, colleagues. Is there anyone who sees something they need to answer or not? No? Okay, well, we'll come back to those questions. Well, thank you very much for these first 2 hours. What we're going to do is we're going to have a break till 11:15, and then we'll come back to go a little bit further into this. We're going to have a presentation about what's new in preparing your application, multi-actor approach and so on, and then we'll really get into the business with the call coordinators of the evaluation process and real advice for you. So 11:15, please, everybody, to come back. Thank you very much so far. Welcome back, everybody. We've had sort of the policy context and the general overview of where we're trying to go in Cluster 6. We're now going to get down to some of the details about what we need to do. So the first person who's going to speak is my very good colleague, Isabel Vergara, who's going to talk about the novelties in Horizon Europe and the cross-cutting aspects. So please, Isabel.
Hello, Paul. Good morning to all. Yes, so I will present the novelties in particular regarding the submission and evaluation of proposals. So if we can show the presentation, please. Yes, yes, I will divide the presentation in two main parts. So I will concentrate first in telling you what is new in the submission process, and then I will continue with the novelties in the evaluation process, and also give some information about the policy consideration that must be taken into account all across the program. So please, if you can go to the next slide. Yes, about admissibility, we have generally continuity with regards Horizon 2020 here. So as in Horizon 2020, application must be submitted before the goal deadline, of course, must be submitted electronically via the funding and tenders portal. The application must be complete, readable, accessible, and printable, and must include a plan for exploitation and dissemination of results, unless this is provided otherwise in the specific goal or topic conditions. For this plan of the exploitation and dissemination of results, if you follow the template that we publish in the portal, you will know the level of details that we are asking in the proposal for this plan for the exploitation and dissemination of results. We have some changes, nevertheless, regarding admissibility in Horizon Europe, and this is about the maximum length that we allow in proposals. We have reduced substantially the maximum length of proposals, and the standard page limit for research and innovation actions is 45 pages. And for coordination and support actions, the page limit is 30. However, you must carefully read the topic conditions because there might be exceptions. So you really need to check what is the page limit in the topic that you want to submit your proposal. If no exception is mentioned in the topic, then the standard page limits that you see in this slide applies. So if you can go to the next slide, please. About eligibility, we have some changes for collaborative projects, so for RIAs and IAs. The consortium composition is very similar as in Horizon 2020. So we request at least 3 independent legal entities from 3 different member states or associated countries, but one of them must come from a member state. And this is the difference in comparison with Horizon 2020. There is also another difference that is not mentioned in this slide, and is with regards the composition of the countries that are allowed to participate in coordination and support actions. In Horizon Europe, only member states and associated countries can participate in coordination and support actions unless it is mentioned otherwise in the topic conditions. We also have another novelty about eligibility and new eligibility condition in Horizon Europe, and this is that we are going to ask participants that are public bodies, research organizations, or higher education establishments from member states and associated countries to have a gender equality plan. This gender equality plan must cover some minimum process-related requirements that you can find which are these minimum process-related requirements in the proposal template. However, it is important to know that even if we are asking now in all proposals whether all participants have this gender equality plan in place, the eligibility condition is not applicable this year. It will start being applicable only from calls with deadlines from 2022 on. Again, so just a clarification, so the eligibility condition applies to public bodies, research organizations, or higher education establishments. But we are asking all type of participants whether they have already a gender equality plan. So we will use a self-declaration. For the time being, this self-declaration is included in the proposal, in the part A of the proposal. In the future, we will encode your self-declaration in our participant register, so that you only have to answer once to these questions, and we will retrieve the information in our register in all proposals that you participate. So if you can go to the next slide, please. About associated countries, so for the time being, we have not finalized any association agreement, but we have started negotiating with some of the countries. Mainly, those are the countries that were already associated in Horizon 2020. And for those countries for which we have started negotiation, we will consider as associated countries for the process of submission and evaluation of proposals. The only condition is that the association agreement with this country must be signed before the signature of the specific grant agreement. There is one mention here about Switzerland. So these transitional conditions do not apply to Switzerland for the time being. So you know that the situation may evolve from one day to the other, but the current situation today is that Switzerland is not considered a to-be associated country. The situation for UK is different, so they plan to negotiate to the Horizon Europe, and they are part of the to-be associated countries. So that means that in terms of submission and evaluation of proposals, they will be considered as if they were already associated to the program, with the condition, again, that the association agreement must be signed before the signature of the grant agreement. So please go to the next slide. Yeah. And then which are the activities eligible for funding? Here we have not made changes in comparison to Horizon 2020. So the eligible activities are the ones described in the call conditions, the call or topic conditions. The activities must focus exclusively on civil applications and must not aim at human cloning for reproductive purposes, intend to modify the genetic heritage of human beings, intend to create human embryos solely for the purpose of research, or lead to the destruction of human embryos. You have more details in this slide. This is not changing from Horizon 2020. These conditions were already there in Horizon 2020. So if you can go to the next slide, please. And then some information about the proposal template that is already published in the portal, in the reference documents page of the portal. We keep the same structure of the proposal template, two parts, part A and part B. Part A is automatically generated by the IT system based on the information that you encode directly in the tool. So it's web-based forms. And the part B is the narrative part that includes 3 sections, each of one corresponding to one of the evaluation criteria. And the part B is uploaded as a PDF document, following the template that you can download from the submission tool. In this slide, you have the link. If you click to the icon, you have the link to the standard template. But the template that you actually must use is the one that you download from the submission tool of the topic that you are submitting your proposal. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So we keep the same structure in the proposal template, but we have nevertheless made some changes. For instance, we have new fields in part A. These new fields are mainly that we are asking now the identity of the researchers. So we are asking at this stage the identity of those researchers that you already have identified. We know that at the proposal stage, you may not have been able to identify all researchers. We are not asking for this detail. We are only asking for those that you have already identified. And we are asking only for researchers. So the reason we are asking for this information is because we have an indicator to evaluate the program as a whole, the whole Horizon Europe program, that deals with the follow-up of researchers' career. So in order to follow or to answer this indicator, we need to identify those researchers that participate in our projects. We have also a new question about the role of participating organization. So each of the participants in a proposal must select the role from a predefined list of roles. And then, as I mentioned, we also have a new question for the self-declaration on gender equality plan. We have also moved fields that in Horizon 2020 were in part B, and now they are in part A. These fields are the ethics self-assessment, so it has to be now, the information has to be encoded now in the part A in 2 different questions. We have a new questionnaire on security. I will come back with more information later on this new questionnaire. And then we also ask in part A now the information on participants' previous activities related to the goal. And then in part B, we keep the same structure, same number of sections as evaluation criteria, but we have made a lot of efforts to try to define the terms that we use and also to ensure consistency on the use of these terms. So we have really ensured consistency on the use of this terminology from the work program preparation to the proposal and also in reporting for funded projects. And then in addition, we have included now in the proposal template extensive explanations on what exactly you should include in each section. So with the aim to help you to write your proposal. So if you can go to the next slide, please. And what is new in the evaluation process? So we start with the work criteria. So we have the same evaluation criteria as in Horizon 2020. These are the 3: excellent, impact, and quality and efficiency of the implementation. In the ERC, proposals are only evaluated with under excellence, so they use only one evaluation criteria. But we have adapted this evaluation criteria following the lessons learned in Horizon 2020. So first, we have reduced the number of aspects to be taken into account in each of the evaluation criteria, ensuring that the same aspect is not assessed twice in 2 different criteria. The evaluation of open science practices is now part of the excellence criterion. It should be taken into account at the time you design your scientific methodology and therefore is evaluated under the excellence criterion. In the past, it was evaluated under impact. We have a new approach to impact. I will give you more information later on this. And then we have reintroduced the assessment of the quality of the individual applicants as part of the evaluation criteria. So before, in Horizon 2020, we were asking the experts to evaluate the consortium as a whole, and then we were asking the experts just a question with two possible answers, yes or no, whether every individual participant had the sufficient operational capacity. But that was not part of the evaluation of the proposal. Of course, if the answer was not, I am talking about Horizon 2020, that participant could not participate in the project. Now we have reintroduced the assessment of the operational capacity as part of the evaluation criteria, and it has to be assessed under the criterion number 3, implementation. And finally, we have removed the assessment of management structures. This doesn't mean that we are not asking for details about management structures, that we do. So you should include details about your management structures when you describe the work package in which you include the management of the project. But we are not going to ask our experts to assess and to evaluate the quality of the management structures that you propose. So we still need this information because this is important information that we would need in the case your proposal is funded. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So now I start saying some information about policy aspects that must be taken all across the program, so meaning in all topics that we open in Horizon 2020. The first one is about open science, that, as I mentioned before, it will be evaluated. We will ask our experts to evaluate it as part of the excellence criterion. So when you design your scientific methodology, it's very important that you already have in mind the open science requirements. These include not only the mandatory open access to publications, but also the active engagement of society. And this is important at the time you design your scientific methodology. So again, so mandatory practices are the open access to publications. So it is important that if you plan to publish your results in publications that are not directly in open access, you need to inform the publisher that you need to keep sufficient IPRs to comply with the requirements in Horizon Europe, because this is an obligation. In Horizon Europe, you have the obligation to publish in open access or to offer open access to publications. It's also mandatory to have a data management plan, and there are topics that include not obligation but incentivize to adhere to other open science practices, like the involvement of citizens, very important, or the use of European Open Science Cloud. So as I mentioned, the open science practices will be evaluated under excellence, but we will also evaluate positively. So we will ask our experts to evaluate positively the quality of the participants when they show previous experience in open access. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So the next policy consideration is gender dimension in research and innovation content that must also be taken into account all across the program. And the difference between Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe is that in Horizon 2020, we flagged the topics where gender dimension in research and innovation content was relevant. Now we do it the other way around. So we consider that gender dimension must be taken into account in all topics in Horizon Europe unless we flag them as not relevant. So if you don't see any reference to gender dimension, it's because you need to take into account gender dimension in your proposal. Otherwise, it will be mentioned in the topic that for that topic, it's not relevant. So it's important here to clarify that we are not talking about gender balance here. So we are talking about taking into account gender consideration at the time you design your scientific methodology. And here you have a list of examples to show why gender dimension is important. For instance, just to give you an idea, now we may ask research on health, on the COVID-19 pandemic. And for instance, we know that there are differences between women and men in regard to the infection levels and mortality rates, etc. So these are the type of questions we are referring when we talk about gender dimension. So it's not gender balance. What we are talking about here is just to take into account the gender considerations in the design of your methodology. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Then, so we have a new methodology to describe the impact of your proposal. And we try to include in the proposal template extensive instructions to help you to show what will be the impact of your proposal. So for you to work, you need to take into account that our topics include very detailed information about the actions that we expect from our projects, and also the effects that we expect from the projects that we are going to fund in every topic. So for every topic, we already described the expected effects of the projects at medium term. This is the outcome. And we also described what are the effects that we expect from the funded projects at a longer term. And this is the expected impact that is described in the destination. So the expected outcome is described in the topic conditions, its medium-term effects, and the expected outcome is described in the destination and refers to the longer-term effects of the project. So what you need to take into account is that, of course, you are answering a topic, so you will present some activities for which we are calling for. And then you will also have to tell us what are the project's results that you expect to obtain, and how, through your dissemination and exploitation activities, how your project will contribute to the expected outcomes, again, medium term, unexpected impacts described in the destination and in the topic. Again, we will also include in the proposal template a kind of diagram to help you describe in a better way what will be the expected outcome and impact of your project. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So here is
you have 4 minutes, so please use it wisely.
Yes. So maybe just skip this because I already mentioned this. If you can go to the next one, please. Yes, so here also very briefly, we also include in the proposal template detailed instructions of the level of details that you need to include with regard to the dissemination, exploitation and communication plan. What it is important is that you not only have to give details about the activities, but you also have to give details about the target groups, who are the groups that will benefit from the project results, and the proposed channels that you plan to interact with those groups. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Also important is about artificial intelligence. So this is a question that we are going to ask to all our experts all across the program. And the artificial intelligence here has two components. So it might well be that we are asking research on artificial intelligence, but it might also be that you are doing research in a totally different area, but that you are using artificial intelligence to help conduct your research. So in both cases, we are going to ask our experts whether you are developing artificial intelligence or using artificial intelligence. And if this is the case, we are going to ask them to assess whether the artificial intelligence tool that you use is technically robust. And you have in this slide information about what we consider technically robust in an artificial intelligence system. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So just a few words about the ethics review. We have not changed dramatically the ethics review process. So again, is conducted all across the program based on the self-assessment that you include in the proposal. So based on the answers that you include in the ethics questionnaire. What we want to do is to focus mainly on complex and serious cases and reduce the number of ethics requirements in funded projects. And finally, if you can go to the next slide, please. So about security scrutiny, this is new in Horizon Europe. We are going to make a pre-assessment of security aspects all across the program. And for this, we have included in the proposal template a short questionnaire asking you whether your proposal uses or generates EU classified information, whether there is potential of misuse of results, and whether activities involve information or material subject to national security restrictions. So if you answer no and we agree with your answers, then we stop doing our assessment here. But if there are some answers positive to these questions, then we trigger a more in-depth security scrutiny in the same way we were doing in the past in Horizon 2020, but only for topics flagged as security relevant. And with this, I finish. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Thank you very much. No, a lot of detailed things there. You need to look at the slides. Some of you might think it is a little bit too much, but I assure you that we spent a lot of time thinking about what we really need to ask and what we perhaps don't. So it has been very carefully thought about. So next, just for very shortly, 5 minutes, we have Inge van Oost from DG Agriculture, who's going to explain what we mean by the multi-actor approach. So Inge, please, 5 minutes. I can't hear you, Inge. Inge?
Yes, working. We have the pleasure in Cluster 6 to have now for all destinations to have the multi-actor approach. Next. And as you see from the data, there's an increasing number of topics and budget in favor of using the multi-actor approach in the topics. It rises to about 50% of the total budget and the total number of topics. And to keep it very short, why multi-actor? To tackle the complex challenges, we really need to use all the brains we can get. Now coming into the details, our multi-actor requirements can be found in the introduction of the work program on page 19 to 21. We're still working on an IT solution, but it hasn't been finished yet. The multi-actor approach is not like SSH or RRI. It is in fact an integral part of the topic text, which is not on the place of the topic text, it's somewhere else, but it is really counted as part of the topic and also for excellence as a criterion. And you see there the two bullets for which it will count. The multi-actor approach is in fact an eligibility criterion, as indicated in the topic table. There's a sentence: proposals must use the multi-actor approach. Outcomes are demand-driven. In this way, more reliable and relevant to society. It's not applied research. This is essential that you understand it. Our end users and practitioners and intermediates are to be involved not as a study object, but to use their practical and local knowledge and entrepreneurial skills to develop solutions. And in this way, we create co-ownership of results of those end users of the results of our projects and the practitioners that are part of the consortium or being involved in the project in another way. And that's why this speeds up the acceptance and the take-up of new ideas, approaches and solutions. So it's all about impact. Here are our multi-actor requirements, which you find in our introduction, all in one slide. First of all, there's one on project objectives that need to target the needs and opportunities of the end users of the project results. We have the project concept and composition of the consortium, which needs to reflect a balanced choice of key relevant actors with complementary knowledge. So we want to see scientific, operational, entrepreneurial, practical knowledge mixed in these projects to ensure we will have in the end a broad implementation and that all these actors are involved all along the course of the project. The cross-fertilization will be the result, and this will then integrate tacit knowledge from the practitioners and practical things that maybe if it would not be a multi-actor project, the researchers would not take in. Sometimes, and it's useful to have facilitation methods to have this multi-actor project getting well engaged, because we are with different actors and they have different views, different time spans, etc. We are also asking about added value, which in fact aligns with what Isabel just said. How will the project complement existing research and best practices? We want to see what the actors have done and how this is not repeating what has already been done before. The results must be practical, also presented in an easy, understandable way, and feed into two types of dissemination channels. Those local, most used by the end users, but also at EU level we want to share, and for EU-wide communication we have practice abstracts in a common format. And then last but not least, we want to link these EU projects, which are sometimes a bit above the heads of the local people. We will need to see in your proposals that you try to make a link to the local interactive innovation groups, such as, for instance, the EIP Agri operational groups under the CAP. And we want to see this very detailed, not as a vague promise. So that's it. I'm open for questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Inga. We have questions a little bit later, I think. At the moment, I would like to go on to the next speakers, who are my colleagues Alessio Bacchielli and Alessandro Chiodini, who are the call coordinators for this call. So the call coordinators have a very, very central post, very central place in organizing the whole evaluation process. And then through into making the ranking list. So I think it'd be very useful to hear from them about key aspects of the evaluation process and advice for quality proposals. So if I can ask Alessio and Alessandro to make their presentation, please, 25 minutes if you could.
Thank you, Paul. My name is Alessio Bacchielli. I will start this presentation on the first part, and the second part will be done by my colleague Alessandro. Next slide, please. So I will speak about implementation aspects of Cluster 6 calls for proposals. So where does the Cluster 6 fits? It fits under the Pillar 2 global challenges and European industrial competitiveness. Next slide, please. Here you see a bit the whole process of the standard evaluation processes. It lasts around 5 months, but technically we should be able to inform with results beforehand. Knowing that there is a call deadline on the 6th of October, we plan to send results around end of January, beginning of February 2022. So about the phases, we will receive all the proposals upon the call deadline. We will run admissibility eligibility check and allocate proposals to evaluators. Then we kick off with the evaluation per se. There is a first phase of individual evaluation where each proposal is assessed individually by allocated evaluators. There are a minimum of 3 evaluators on each proposal. Later on, we tackle the so-called consensus group, where the evaluators assigned to each of the proposals will basically reach a consensus. Afterwards, we have the so-called panel review. So a panel of experts, they meet and reach an agreement on the score and the comments, and we can draw a final ranking, also ensuring that there is consistency across evaluation. Afterwards, we finalize the evaluation and we are ready to send out the so-called evaluation result letters to all the applicants. Next slide, please. Here you can see the 4 types of action. We will have, as it was already in Horizon 2020, the so-called research and innovation action, the innovation action and coordination and support actions. And now we have this new scheme called Program Co-Fund Actions, which you might remember in the past was called the EJP. The funding is 100% for research, innovation action and coordination and support actions. For innovation action, it is 100%, but only for non-profit entities, whereas the profit-making ones will receive a 70%. For co-fund, the funding range is between 30 and 70%. In 2021, cluster 6, we will only have single stage calls. Next slide, please. About evaluation principles, if you can, yes. We will ensure, of course, fair and equal treatment among all applicants. That means we will assess proposals in the same way, all proposals submitted. If you can click. Yes, we will, of course, instruct our evaluators to perform the evaluation based only on predefined evaluation criteria Isabel Vergara anticipated before, and on what are the topic texts, so what is written in the work program. The evaluation will be carried out by external and independent experts, and we will, of course, ensure the whole process is confidential, and there will be, of course, absence of conflict of interest, so to have an unbiased evaluation. Next slide, please. So, as anticipated before by Isabel Vergara, there are 3 evaluation criteria, the same ones as Horizon 2020. If you can click, there is an animation. Yes, so the excellence, impact and quality and efficiency of the implementation. And if you can click again. Concerning the page limit, we confirm the standard page limit that was substantially reduced in comparison to Horizon 2020. There are no special page limits. So research, innovation action and innovation action will be limited to 45 pages, CSAs to 30 pages and co-fund to 70 pages. Next slide, please. Here you can see the definition of research, innovation action and innovation action, and more in detail, what are the excellence, impact and implementation criteria, including the full description of the sub-criteria. I will confirm that indeed there was a substantial reduction on the sub-criteria. You might remember we had before in Horizon 2024 sub-criteria for the excellence, for instance. Open science is now part of the evaluation in the excellence. There is this new approach to assess the impact and the outcomes, which is called the pathways to achieve the expected outcomes and impacts. And in the implementation, there was also a substantial reduction in sub-criteria, where now we will ask our evaluators to assess the consortium and then the quality of each participant. Next slide, please. This is for the CSA. It's basically the same for impact and implementation in comparison to RIA and EAS. The excellence is slightly different and was adapted to the nature of the type of action of a common and support action. So it's about the project objectives and the proposed coordination support measures concerning the excellence. Next slide, please. About the co-fund, here you have also the description of the type of action. Is this kind of a big program that allows to fund activities established in EU member states, RNI programs other than EU funding bodies. The excellence, impact, and quality of efficiency of the implementation are described below, and they are basically the same as RIA and EAS. Next slide, please. Here you see the interpretation of the scores. They go from 0 to 5. As you can see, it's basically the same ones as it was in Horizon 2020. Please pay attention to the fact that we use the words weaknesses and shortcomings, and there are differences for this. So the same amount of the half scores can also be given. Next slide, please. Here you see the thresholds for award criteria. So it's 3 out of 5 for each of the evaluation criteria. The total score must be at least 10 out of 15. There is also a multiplier factor for innovation actions that incur only in the impact of 1.5. Then when we have the final ranking and we have proposals with the same scores, we apply a certain methodology to rank the proposals, which starts with proposals that address core topics not otherwise covered by more highly ranked proposals. Then if the score is always the same, we start to see excellence takes priority and then impact. This for research, innovation, action, and CSA, whereas for innovation action, it's before the impact and then the excellence. Then we see the gender balance, and linking to what Isabel Vergara was saying before in part A, you are required to flag the gender of the key staff personnel of the consortium. We will use that information if we come to this point, and then the so-called geographical diversity, which basically assess how much diverse in terms of consortium composition proposal is. Next slide, please. So who is eligible for funding? As before, it's the EU countries, the European member states, of course, the so-called overseas countries and territories that are linked to the European member states. In terms of non-EU countries, we have the so-called associated countries. There are ongoing discussions to conclude this association agreement, as said before. Low and middle income countries, the whole list is available in the Horizon Europe program guide, and also countries that are specifically required or eligible as explained in the topics in the work program. And then we have specific cases where basically we can also fund countries or international organization if applicants in third countries or international organization, if the evaluators consider that their participation is deemed essential. International organizations of European interest are automatically eligible for funding. On top of that, there are also some additional eligibility conditions in some Cluster 6 topics. You will see this precisely at the beginning of each of the concerned topics. For example, international organization where headquarters are located in EU member states or associated countries are eligible to participate. Only for some topics. Next slide, please. So now a bit more on the exceptional funding for third country applicants and international organization. Please read the Horizon Europe program guide. As said before, applicants from some third countries like the industrialized countries, you can think of the US, Canada, India, or China, are not automatically eligible for funding. As a result, evaluators will assess if their participation is essential. Therefore, you need to be specific and complete the section 3.2 in part B of the proposal template explaining why the participation of such applicants is essential. If the participation is not deemed essential, basically that participant will not receive EU funding. As a result, be prepared for a plan B. You cannot give for granted that applicants from international organizations or applicants from specific third countries will be considered exceptionally fundable. Next slide, please. And then for some topics, you see the list in the bottom of the slide, the financial support to third parties applied. This again is explained as a specific call condition. It means basically that you can run a small call and award some little grants. Of course, there are some rules to do so. You have to explain what are the objectives and the expected results. You need to publish such a call widely and adhere to the EU standards of transparency. Publish them in the funding and tender portals. There is a specific section for that, and in the website of the beneficiary. These calls must be open for at least 2 months. And of course, you need to publish the outcome of the call. I have finished my part. I will pass the floor to my colleague Alessandro for the second part of this presentation.
Oh, thank you very much, Alessio. Thank you very much, colleagues. This last part of the presentation is about some points that you need to consider when you're writing your proposal in Horizon Europe, and especially what concerns the Cluster 6. Next slide, please. So, starting from the basics. So, there are like some key principles that you need to check before starting preparing your proposal, and also while you are preparing this. The first of all is that you need to understand that even ourselves, our independent expert that we're going to use in order to assess the proposal, have two basic things to assess. One is the evaluation criteria, so the 3 criteria and the sub-criteria that my colleague Alessio spoke about before, and the topic text. So this is only two, let's say, the two Bibles, two things that you need to take into consideration. So your proposal needs to adhere to the evaluation criteria and to the topic text, because this is how your proposal will be assessed against. And then, in addition, you need to demonstrate some ambition, because you need to go beyond the state of the art. Before we talk about research innovation action. So there are like some proposal according to the type of action that you're going to choose that needs to show some ambition, because you need to go really far beyond the state of the art. Then another thing that you need to focus your attention is your scientific methodology, and then this, as said before, not to repeat too much, is you need to account the interdisciplinary, the gender dimension, the open science practices. That all of this will be assessed under the excellence criterion. And then also you need to show how your proposed work could contribute to the expected outcomes. They are listed in the topics, but also all the impact described in the work program and beyond. And then later on, I will show slides about the key impact pathways. Also, after the completion of the project, there's one important part is communication and dissemination exploitation plan. And then so you need to show to us, so to the external experts, the plan measure that you would like to use in order to maximize the impact of the projects. And then this is especially related to dissemination, exploitation, and communication activities. Also, at the end, the quality and the efficiency of your implementation, you should be able to demonstrate how the quality of your work, and then how you would like to use efficiently your resources and interconnection of the different participants in your consortium. Next slide, please. So this is what you're seeing on the screen is the highlights of all policy and horizontal consideration that most of those have been said before. But then in my presentation, I will touch upon only some of those. And then we try to translate some of those into a real practical example that are applicable to Cluster 6. So, and then all this aspect must be normally considered in all Horizon Europe goals, unless is explicitly mentioned that they don't need to be considered. So please take into consideration that all 6 here highlighted in the slides need to be inserted somehow in your proposal under excellence, impact on implementation. Next slide, please. So start with the first one on top is the open science. So open science is a key policy priority for European Commission. It was introduced by the previous Commissioner of Research, Karol Moedas, as part of the open science, open access, and open to the world. And then this is a reiterated message, so it's still valid as key priority for European Commission. But then open science is also an approach that you need to use, and is a knowledge approach that you need to use in order to share not only the results of your projects, where these are coming to an end, but they also share the data and the approaches that you use in order to retrieve those data. And then there are some approaches that you can use, like before the FAIR principle was highlighted, so the open access, the fact that you can introduce the raw data that you're using for in your methodology, in your project that you have identified in some repository, in order that this can be freely applicable and also available to other applicants in the same domain or other domain area. And then this is the sharing of knowledge can augment the impact of the science that you are producing. And then here we put two practical examples, one from the Farmtofolk and the other for the governance, where is explicitly mentioned which kind of open access, open science approach that you can use. And then again, remember that these are applicable to all topics. Next slide, please. Then very briefly, because we had an extensive presentation by our colleague Inge about multi-actor approach. So multi-actor is part of the open science practices, and then basically it aims to make the research innovation process and the outcome more demand-driven and also reliable and relevant. This, just a reminder, will be assessed under the excellence criterion, so the first award criterion. And then next slide, please. Another important aspect that was touched also by previous colleague is gender dimension in research. So again, this is applicable to all topics except if explicitly mentioned. For example, here we put an example in the biodiv called 0108, where it is said that you don't need to take into consideration the gender dimension in research. And then basically what is this gender dimension research is how sex and gender analysis can be applied in the quality of your research. Apart from gender dimension, we talk also about gender balance and the gender equality plan. So the gender balance is not an award criterion. It's a criterion that is used only after the evaluation if there are ex aequo proposals in order to discriminate and make our ranking list. And then the gender equality plan will be, because it's not applicable as of 2021, but then will be from 2022 as an eligibility criterion. And then in this gender equality plan, it's basically a plan. I searched for this in some website of some public institution, and then they already have in their website some information about, for example, career stage, how they would like to, let's say, augment this gender balance in early stage career research, and so on. And then all this information are also available about gender, open science, and so on and so forth in the standard application form. If you type standard application form Horizon Europe, you can find, for example, on Google, some standard form that you can use, for example, for innovation action or research innovation action. And then in there, it's not only a template of the things that you need to fill it in for part A and part B in order to prepare your proposal, but there are also some information, some tips and tricks, some examples that you can really take on board and use in order to prepare your proposal. Now, coming down to the cluster 6, what is gender dimension is like sex and gender differences, for example, in human intervention trials. This is a practical example, or how nutrition counseling could be tailored differently from men and women, and also how climate change is affecting sex determination in a number of marine species. So this is what specifically for cluster 6 can be related to gender dimension in research in cluster 6. Next slide, please. Also, this, as said before, there was the key impact pathways. So the key impact pathways is basically a proxy that you can use in order to assess and understand if your research, so what you are doing, has an impact at topic level, but also has a greater impact at work program level or at destination level. So basically, you're starting. So here we have like two building blocks, the left side and the right side on yellow. So if you focus our attention on the left side box, first, this is what you're going to do when you're preparing your proposal and if your proposal is deemed successful in your running projects. So you have an input. So you have some specific needs that you have highlighted in your project that are going to be translated in some project results. And then in what I was saying before, in the standard application form, you have an example about airports. So we try to translate this example in something that is more applicable to the, say, life science domain. So something that is basically related to cluster 6. So you have some, human resources and expertise that can be translated, and this is valid for the climate topic. So you can have successful studies on phenotype and potential breeding in order to reduce the greenhouse gases in animal emission and also adapt to climate change. And then in order to have a greater impact of this, you can use dissemination, exploitation, and communication activities. But then what is coming next, so on the right side, the yellow boxes, is your greater impact that you can have in its work program as an outcome and also at destination level, because each destination has several impacts, expected impact. So what you need to provide in these key impact pathways is, for example, the narrative. So you need to convince us that what you are doing has a greater impact, not only at project level and in order to adhere to the expected impact that are within the topic, but also to those ones that are at the destination level, for example. And then in there, you can have, for example, specific needs, target population, anything that could enhance and then have a greater impact at destination level. Next slide, please.
Can you start to move to a close now, Alessandro, please?
Yeah, I will close in 2 minutes. So finally, there are the 3 last slides can be very quick. So I would like to conclude with some tips that can be used in order to prepare your evaluation. So again, this is very repeating myself, but then it's very important. So read carefully the topic description. And I repeat it again, read carefully the topic description. And then also check all the topic conditions, because not all conditions are applicable to any topics, basically. Also, you might want to check in Cordis. So there is the Cordis result pack where you can look for projects that are already being approved and financed on similar research areas, similar topics that you would like to apply. You also contact your national NCPs in order to look for potential partners in order to build your consortium and participate in the brokerage event, for example, on the 9th of July. Next slide, please. Yeah, again, please also, when you write your proposal, pay attention to the page limits. As we said, this has been sensibly reduced from the 70-page limit in Horizon 2020 to 45 to 30, according to the type of action. Also, when your proposal is coming to an end, we would advise to give a fresh eye. So someone that is not being let's say, used in the preparation of the proposal could give like a fresh eyes or impartial, let's say, proofread of this. And also, most important is pay attention to the deadline. So all call deadlines are a deadline at a certain date. In this case, the 6th of October for the upcoming one at 5 o'clock p.m. So the 5 o'clock p.m. is the usual target deadline for each of the calls. And then the final slide. And then in any case, there are like also two things that I would like to consider. One is to look at the funding attendant portal, and then there is a section in Join Us as an expert. This information is quite useful because you can register in our database of potential experts that could be used in upcoming evaluation. This could give you also some hints in order to better understanding how we manage and we do the process of evaluation. It also can give you some, let's say, hints in if you would like to apply and make a future proposal, how this can be more tailor-made for the cluster 6. And then coming to a next, this is really the last one, all useful information, next slide please. All the useful information are on the funding attendant portal. So if you go in there, you can have a reference to any guidance document or any kind of information that should be there. And then with this, I would like to conclude.
Thank you very much. No, very useful, and there is plenty of guidance out there. We tried to put it all together in one package. Let's hope it is useful for you. So we're going to go to some questions now. So could someone put the Slido questions up on the screen, please? And I believe the very top one, which didn't look so big to me, but is obviously very important to many people. So Isabel, could you maybe answer this? Our submission box page has a box for other annexes. Can we upload letters of support even if the topic description does not mention this? Please, Isabel.
Yes, so I can give a general answer. So always that we allow the uploading of a general annexes is because we have a purpose for them. So this is the case, for instance, if your proposal will include clinical trials, so you have to give us some information in these other annexes. But my answer would be that if we don't ask for support letters, don't upload them in the general annexes. So upload them only if we ask for them.
Yeah, thank you. No, we're not impressed with letters of support in general. There's several questions, not on the screen actually, but several questions about the researchers in the application, Isabel. There's a few people asking, is it only PhDs, is it only qualified researchers, or is it more widely? A number of people asking, do we need to keep it up to date? Do we need to speculate on who might do this in the future? Can you just go over that again briefly, please?
Yes, so in the proposal template, we defined the different research roles that we include. So please go and read the instructions that you will find probably the role that you are looking for the person that you have identified. So please don't speculate. We understand that at the time of the proposal, you might not know yet the identity of the researchers. So give us only the identity that you have in your hands at the time of the proposal. So later on, if your proposal is retained for funding, then we will ask more details. Yeah, but at another stage. Yeah.
That's right. Absolutely. Thank you. On the gender equality plan, I think we've been clear it's not an eligibility criteria. It's something that will be assessed later. What I wasn't quite clear, and I think a few other people, is for whom is it directly applicable? For small businesses, for example, do we expect them to have a gender equality plan? Isabel?
Well, I mentioned in the slide that the eligibility criterion applies only to public bodies, research organizations, and higher education establishments. So only to these three different type of entities, the eligibility criterion apply. Yeah. And indeed, only from next year on.
Yeah, and that's a deliberate policy for, big public bodies. We think they should have a gender equality plan. Inga, there was a question about the multi-actor approach as an eligibility criteria. I think that's answered now. It's basically, when we're evaluating, you're not going to be successful unless you've got the multi-actor approach embedded in your application, but it's not strictly an eligibility criteria, I think. Is that right?
It is a strict eligibility criteria. It forms really fully part of the topic, but because of logical reasons that we don't want to repeat it 50 times and make the work program 800 pages instead of 500, we just put it in the introduction.
Okay.
But of course, we expect that you read it and you take it seriously into account as an eligibility criterion.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think you're going to be selected if you don't. Okay. Yeah, quality of the consortium how is the quality of the consortium scored? A popular question. I think that's part of the implementation, isn't it, Isabel, or one of the other colleagues, Alessio, maybe? Quality of the consortium.
Yes, I can answer that. Indeed, it's in the quality of the consortium. So the second implementation sub-criterion, and it's part A. So evaluators will assess that by reading part A of the proposal.
Okay. There was one question, just a couple of ticks about the money follows a researcher principle. That doesn't really apply in Pillar 2. It applies in the European Research Council, where you are actually funding a researcher. We are not funding researchers, in fact. We fund research institutions. We reimburse the costs of individual researchers. So our contract is with the institution or the employer and not the individual researcher. So the researcher, money follows the researcher principle doesn't apply for this particular pillar. Then there was we can just perhaps go back to open science, where there was a few questions. Just see if I can find the questions again. Yeah, there are a number of other things going on with Elsevier and some of the other big companies to see what we can do about open science. But it is a general principle now for open science. Maybe Isabel or one of the other colleagues want to come in and just go over the open science requirements again, please, for people. Isabel, Alessio, were you talking about that? Isabel?
Well, yeah, maybe I don't see the question, but what I can add that there are plenty of information in the Horizon Europe program guide that is published now in the portal. So you have there all details about the requirements that we ask in Horizon Europe. But in general terms, there is an obligation to offer open access to publications. And then for some topics, there are additional requirements related to open science, like the involvement of society or civil organizations, etc. So you need to read the topic conditions. But the standard obligation is that you need to ensure open access to publications. Yeah. Yeah. But again, there is plenty of information in the Horizon Europe program guide published in the portal. Yeah.
Okay. And there is one question, I think it's something that's quite important, the do no significant harm principle, which I know has caused a lot of concern amongst people about whether it's really eligibility blocking, how it's going to be resolved. The actual question says, why is the do not significant harm principle, why is it not included as part of the ethical considerations in the ethical assessment? Why separate it? But I think it's worth just saying a word on the do no significant harm principle. Would someone like to come in on that?
I can say something, because we have made a change of approach regarding the do not significant harm principle. So what we presented in the webinar around March is, it has changed slightly. So the instructions that we are going to tell our evaluators is that they should not assess the compliance with the do not significant harm principle, but we nevertheless ask the participants to tell us whether or how they will compliant with the do not significant harm principles when they think in the scientific methodology and also when they think in the expected results. But this will not, the compliance with the do not significant harm principle will not be evaluated, but we will nevertheless ask with regards to the impact of the proposal, whether the proposal has a negative impact to the environment. This is a question that is there, and it's somehow related to the do not significant harm principle, but it's not exactly the same. So what I can say, probably I am just confusing people now, is that we have update the instructions regarding the do not significant harm principle in the Horizon Europe program guide, but the compliance will not be evaluated.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, we screened the whole work program very carefully to ensure there are no topics which would or might cause significant harm. So as far as possible, we've tried to make sure that there is no more possibility for this to happen. But please just keep that in mind. Okay, can we move down the questions, please, because I think these are answered or not especially relevant for this session. Yeah, international partners that are not eligible to EU funding, can eligible partners pay for their travel costs? I guess the answer is they can, but they can't recharge it to us. I mean, that's the basic principle, isn't it? Isabel, can you answer that? Do you know it?
Can you repeat?
So the question is on the screen now. How to fund international partners that are not eligible for EU funding? Can the eligible partners pay for their travel costs? Okay, not at our expense, I guess, is the answer.
No, so as I think Alessio explained, they are always allowed to participate. So we are open to participation in our projects all across the world. But some countries, some organizations coming from the highest economy countries in the world, they will not receive funding automatically. So we allow them to participate, always with a reason, with a role, but we don't fund them automatically. So if they participate, they have to come with their own funding, yeah, and they have to explain in the proposal how they are going to contribute to the project. And in the specific case that they ask for funding, we will ask our experts whether we agree to exceptionally fund those participants with some conditions, because the expertise is unique and we cannot find another expertise in Europe because they come with some resources that we cannot find in Europe, etc., etc. So that was explained by Alessio.
Exactly. And the UK, I think you were clear enough on the UK. We are certainly hoping to sign soon the final agreement, but you know that things are quite delicate with the UK. So at the moment, the UK is eligible to be members of a consortium, even to lead, just like any other associated country.
Yes, it's in the list of to be associated countries, so they can participate as associated countries, so they will be considered associated country with the condition that the association agreement must be signed before grant signature.
Yeah. Okay, can you take those 4 questions off, please, and let's move down a little bit further. Yeah, TRL 5 in social topics. Can anyone explain a little bit more about the TRL levels when it's not really related to technology? Nobody putting themselves forward. Now, normally I think in social topics there shouldn't be TRL levels there. Will the partnerships have specific topics in separate work programs? No, with the exception of the joint undertakings, all the topics are in this work program. And you'll see that the biodiversity partnership is the first one that will be closed and evaluated in July. For some topics, the procedure info indicated a portfolio approach in the evaluation process. How will this work? Does anyone know about that?
I can answer this.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Paul. Yes, for example, in governance call, the governance 0102, there is this portfolio approach, and the topic text, actually the conditions of the topic say that at least one of each transformative actions, subtopics will be funded. Therefore, after the evaluation, the top ranked ones of each subtopic will be basically funded. We have introduced, thanks for this question from the audience, FAQs on the page of these topics having this portfolio approach, where we actually ask applicants to choose the subtopic or the transformative actions and to specify it in the abstract of the proposals in part A.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So to give us a chance to build this portfolio approach more than...
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Switzerland again. Can we just remind us about Switzerland, Isabel, please?
Yes, so for the time being, and this you need to be careful because the situation may evolve from one day to the other. So we are not active in the negotiation with Switzerland, so they are not considered to be associated countries today. Yeah, so you really need to check the portal and look for news there, because we will publish in the portal news as soon as we have an update into this approach. But today, Switzerland is not included in the list of to be associated countries.
So in principle, not eligible for funding, with the exception of international organizations, of course, of which there are many in Switzerland. Okay, a newcomer looking to set up a consortium. Are there guidelines for preparing a proposal? Well, yes, many, and that's what you've been hearing about today on the funding and tenders portal. But the most important thing is setting up the consortium, and that's the brokerage event that's coming on Friday, and other things that we've done should help you in that. Yeah, there's a question down there, the colleagues as researchers, but as Isabel said, there are guidance about how you should categorize different people who are working on the different programs, and that should help you. Is Impact Table 2.3 mandatory, or is it also allowed to do it in another way, covering one rather than 2 pages? Isabel, can you help with that?
Yes, so it is just, we saw in the proposal template just a way in which you can summarize how you can express the impact of your proposal. So it's not mandatory to include this section, this table, in the same way that other sections in the proposal template are also not mandatory. And indeed, you can change the layout of this table as you consider appropriate for your proposal.
Okay. Researchers table, I think we've already dealt with that. Projects linking climate and health, I think we talked about that. That was well explained by different people. Clinical trials, I don't think we have them particularly. We don't finance clinical trials in Cluster 6, is not our intention there. Complementaries with ESIF, yeah, I talked about that earlier. Okay. I don't know if there's any other things that you colleagues have spotted on the way through, but that seems to have answered most of the major questions for me. Anything else? We're happy. Okay. Well, I think that I suggest then that we've probably done enough for this morning. I think that's quite a long session. Can somebody tell me what time we intend to start in the afternoon? I've lost track of my paper. 1:30. Okay, thank you very much, colleagues, and thank you very much for listening. So this afternoon then and tomorrow we start to look at the individual actions, short videos and explanations, question and answer sessions on that. I hope that will get down to points that are really interesting to you. but I hope that you've managed to hear this morning about enough information to get you on your way. We're very, very much looking forward to implementing this Cluster 6, so please get your applications in. We are starting the process of contracting with the evaluators now. I think we have over 1,000 evaluators for what we imagine will be quite popular calls. We look forward to receiving your applications. Thank you very much, everybody, and we'll start again in different rooms, I think, at 1:30. Thank you very much to everybody.